Hey there, fiction fans. Welcome to Proxima What Ifs. We've got something special today. What if Harry could transform into a Nundu and his breath killed every Dementor in Azkaban? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's begin this epic tale. Chapter 1, The Beast Beneath the Skin. Chapter 1, The Beast Beneath the Skin. The summer after Cedric Diggory died was the quietest summer of Harry Potter's life, and that was saying something, because every summer at Privet Drive felt like being buried alive in beige wallpaper and passive-aggressive silence. But this was different. This wasn't the quiet of boredom. This wasn't Uncle Vernon's pointed newspaper rustling or Aunt Petunia's thin-lipped refusal to acknowledge his existence. This was the quiet that came after something inside you broke and you were still figuring out which piece it was. The kind of quiet where you'd be washing dishes and suddenly your hands would stop moving and you'd just stand there, staring at soap bubbles, remembering green light and a boy who said, "Take my body back." Harry stood at his bedroom window on Privet Drive, for weeks into July, watching absolutely nothing happen on the street below. Mrs. Number 7 was watering her petunias again. The Dursleys' car sat in the driveway like a fat, shiny beetle. Hedwig was out hunting. And somewhere out there, Voldemort was alive and building an army, and nobody in the entire wizarding world seemed to care because the Daily Prophet said Harry Potter was a liar and Cornelius Fudge said everything was fine, and Dumbledore had gone so quiet that Harry sometimes wondered if he'd imagined the old man entirely. He flexed his right hand. The one that had held a wand against Voldemort in that graveyard. The one that had gripped Cedric's wrist as they'd both grabbed the cup. The one that hadn't been fast enough. "Stop it," he muttered to himself. He'd been doing that a lot lately. Talking to himself. Not in a going crazy way, at least, he didn't think so, but in a trying to stay anchored way. Like if he didn't say things out loud sometimes, the silence would eat him whole. Downstairs, Dudley was watching television loud enough to rattle the ceiling. Some action movie with a lot of explosions. Harry could feel the bass through the floor. It was almost comforting in its mindlessness. He turned from the window and sat on his bed, pulling a loose floorboard aside with practiced ease. Underneath, buried beneath his invisibility cloak and the Marauder's map and a half-eaten pack of chocolate frogs from Hermione, was a small two-way mirror. Sirius's mirror. His godfather had pressed it into his hand at King's Cross at the end of term, eyes fierce and a little desperate. "If you need me," Sirius had said. "For anything. Any time. Don't be a noble idiot about it, Harry, I mean it." Harry had been a noble idiot about it for exactly 11 days before he'd cracked at 2 in the morning, alone in the dark, heart hammering from a nightmare where Cedric's body kept asking why Harry hadn't saved him. He'd whispered Sirius's name into the glass and his godfather had appeared almost instantly, like he'd been waiting by the mirror all along. Which, knowing Sirius, he probably had. Since then, they'd talked almost every night. And it was during one of those conversations, 3 nights ago, to be specific, that Sirius had said the thing that changed everything. "You know," Sirius had said, his face flickering in the mirror's surface, all sharp cheekbones and haunted eyes and that grin that was trying so hard to be the grin of a younger man, "Your dad and I started the Animagus process when we were about your age." Harry had blinked. "I thought that was 3rd year. Started the research in 3rd year. Didn't actually begin the transformation work until the summer before 5th year. James was climbing the walls by then. Needed something to focus on. Something that was his, you know. Not schoolwork, not Quidditch, not the war that was already starting to brew out there." Sirius's expression had gone distant for a moment. "Sometimes you need a thing that's just yours." Harry had understood that so deeply it almost hurt. "The process is brutal," Sirius had continued. "Took us the better part of 2 years, and we were cutting corners that would have given McGonagall a heart attack. But Harry..." He'd leaned closer to the mirror. "Your dad was a natural. Fastest Animagus transformation I've ever seen once we got going. There's something in the Potter blood. Always has been. Your family's got old magic, older than wands, older than Hogwarts. Beast magic. The kind that, he'd stopped himself, looking uncertain for the first time. I shouldn't be encouraging this. Sirius. You're 15. I faced Voldemort in a graveyard 3 weeks ago. Silence. Then Sirius had run a hand over his face, and when he'd looked back, his expression was something new. Not the protective godfather. Not the reckless prankster. Something in between. Something that said, yeah, you're right, and I hate that you're right. I'll send you the notes, Sirius had said. James's notes, and mine. Everything we documented about the process. But Harry, you do this carefully. You do this slowly. The animagus transformation isn't something you can force. The animal chooses you. You have to hold a mandrake leaf under your tongue for a full month, brew the potion, wait for an electrical storm. I know the textbook version. The textbook version is the safe version. The version that gives you a nice, predictable form. A dog, a cat, a stag. Something in Sirius's voice had shifted. But the Potter family notes, they talk about something else. Something older. A method that doesn't just let the animal choose you. It lets the magic in your blood wake up. And whatever comes out of that. He trailed off. James got a stag. Regal. Noble. Very on brand for the arrogant bastard. A sad smile. But his grandfather supposedly got something different. Something the family didn't talk about. What? I don't know. James never found out. The records were lost when your grandparents died. But the point is, the Potter animagus legacy isn't just about cute party tricks. There's something deeper there. Wilder. Harry had sat in the dark for a long time after that conversation, holding the mirror, thinking. Something that was his. Something wild. The notes arrived 2 days later, shrunk and tucked inside Hedwig's leg tube, disguised as a rolled-up sweet wrapper that expanded into 60 pages of cramped handwriting when you tapped it with a wand. 2 sets of notes, interleaved, James Potter's neat, almost architectural print, and Sirius Black's chaotic scrawl with doodles in the margins. Little cartoon dogs and stags. Inside jokes Harry couldn't parse. References to Mooney's furry little problem and Wormtail's cheese obsession. Harry tried not to think about the fact that one of the people who'd written these notes had betrayed the other to a Dark Lord. He focused on the magic instead. The notes described 2 paths. The first was the standard animagus method. Mandrake leaf, potion, storm, transformation. Ministry approved, relatively safe, well documented. This was the path McGonagall had taken. The path that gave you a form you could control from day one. The second path was something James had found in an old Potter family grimoire and copied down with a note in the margin that said Padfoot, look at this. This is mental. It was called the Bestial Awakening. The concept was simple. Terrifyingly simple. Instead of imposing a transformation on your magic and letting an animal form emerge from the shaped spell, you opened a door. Inside yourself. You mated, and Harry almost laughed at that, picturing James Potter trying to mate, but it wasn't normal Mad-Ion. You went inward. Down. Past the conscious magic, past the learned spells and wand movements and incantations, past even the accidental magic of childhood, all the way down to the base. The foundation. The raw, unstructured, pre-civilized magic that every witch and wizard carried in their blood but almost none of them ever touched. And you asked it what it was. Not what you want to be, James had written, underlining it 3 times. What you are. The difference matters. The first path lets you choose. The second path reveals. And once it reveals, you can't unknow it. Below that, in Sirius's handwriting, James says he felt the stag the first time he went deep. Said it was like meeting something that had always been standing behind him. I told him that's the creepiest thing anyone's ever said to me, and I grew up in a house with shrunken house elf heads on the wall. And then, in James's writing again, smaller, more serious. The grimoire warns that the bestial awakening can produce forms that the standard method never would. Magical creatures. Things with power of their own. It says the Potters have produced at least one Thunderbird, one Wampus, and something the text just calls, the Great Cat, without further description. Sirius thinks I should try the standard method. He's probably right. But I want to know. I want to know what's in there. A note at the bottom, added later in different ink, got the stag. Beautiful animal. I'm calling him Prongs. Padfoot almost cried but will deny it. Still wonder what the Great Cat was, though. Harry read those notes over and over until the words blurred. Then he closed his eyes and did something he'd never done before. He went looking for what was inside him. The first few attempts were pathetic, honestly. Harry sat cross-legged on his bed at Privet Drive with his eyes closed, trying to go inward, and mostly just ended up with a stiff back and a headache. He didn't know how to mate. He didn't know how to quiet his mind. Snape would have had a field day with that admission, and every time he tried to push past the surface of his thoughts, he ran into the same wall of grief and anger and fear that had been living in his chest since June. Cedric's face. Voldemort's red eyes. The feeling of the Cruciatus curse. His parents' shades emerging from a wand. He'd open his eyes, gasping, and punch his pillow and stare at the ceiling and think, this is pointless, I'm never going to, but he kept trying. Because the alternative was lying in the dark doing nothing while Voldemort got stronger, and Harry was done doing nothing. He was done being a kid who things happened to. He wanted to be something. Something that could fight back. Something that could protect the people something that wouldn't freeze in a graveyard while a good person died. It was on the 7th night, sitting on his bedroom floor at 1 a.m. with Hedwig watching from her cage like a feathery, judgmental therapist, that something shifted. He'd been pushing inward again, past the grief, past the anger, and for the first time, he got through. Like punching through a membrane he hadn't known was there. And suddenly the inside of his mind didn't feel like a dark room anymore. It felt like a landscape. Vast and wild and completely, impossibly dark, but not empty. There was something in the dark. Something enormous. He couldn't see it but he could feel it, a presence, a pressure, a weight in the air like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. And then he felt it breathe. Not heard. Felt. A warm exhalation that smelled like ozone and something green and living and something else that was neither of those things, something that made every survival instinct in Harry's body light up like a Christmas tree because that smell was wrong in the way that only deeply dangerous things were wrong. Not evil. Just, lethal. Casually, fundamentally lethal, the way a volcano was lethal, the way the deep ocean was lethal. Harry's eyes snapped open and he was back in his bedroom on Privet Drive, and his hands were shaking so hard his knuckles knocked against the floorboards. Hedwig hooted softly. Concerned. I'm fine, Harry whispered. Then, what the hell was that? Hedwig didn't answer, because she was an owl. He grabbed the mirror. Sirius. Sirius. It took 4 minutes. Then Sirius's face appeared, bleary-eyed, hair a disaster. Harry. It's one in the, I found it. The thing inside. The animal. Sirius, I found it. Sirius was suddenly very awake. Already? Harry, it took James 3 months of, it's not a stag. Silence. Okay, Sirius said slowly. Okay. What did you feel? Harry tried to find words for it. For that impossible, terrible, beautiful weight in the darkness. For the breath that smelled like life and death tangled together. Big, he said finally. Really, really big. Like, a cat, I think. But not a house cat. Not even a lion. Bigger than that. And the breath, Sirius, the breath. It smelled like. He shook his head. Like if poison could be alive. Like if death was a gas and it just, breathed it. Sirius had gone very still on the other side of the mirror. His face was doing something complicated. Multiple emotions fighting for space. Sirius? What is it? What am I? I need you to describe exactly what you felt. Every detail. The size, the breath, the smell. Everything. Harry did. And with every word, Sirius's face got a shade paler. When Harry finished, Sirius sat back. He was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said, very carefully, Harry. I think you need to stop the process. What? Why? Because if I'm right about what's living inside you, then the bestial awakening isn't just going to give you an animagus form. It's going to give you a weapon of mass destruction. Sirius, what is it? Another long pause. Then, barely above a whisper, a Nundu. Harry stared. You know what that is? Sirius asked. Newt Scamander's book. Giant leopard, native to East Africa. Breath causes disease that can wipe out entire villages. Harry recited it from memory, because he'd read Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them cover to cover in third year out of sheer boredom. XXXXX classification. The most dangerous creature in existence. It's never been subdued by fewer than 100 trained wizards working together. That's the textbook version, yeah. Sirius's voice was rough. The reality is worse. A Nundu isn't just dangerous, Harry. It's an apex predator that even dragons avoid. Its breath isn't just disease, it's concentrated death magic. Not dark magic, not a curse, but the raw magical essence of ending things. That's why it can wipe out villages. That's why 100 wizards can barely handle one. You can't shield against it because it's not a spell. It's a force of nature. Harry sat there, on his bedroom floor, in a suburban house in Surrey, and tried to process the fact that apparently his soul animal was the magical equivalent of a nuclear bomb. The great cat, he said suddenly. In your notes. James's family grimoire. The form they didn't describe. Sirius closed his eyes. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what it was. A Potter ancestor was a Nundu animagus. And the family buried it. Literally never spoke of it again. That should tell you something, Harry. It told Harry a lot of things. It told him that this was dangerous and terrifying and completely, utterly unprecedented in modern magical history. It told him that a sane person would stop right now, seal up the door he'd opened in his mind, and go back to being a normal, well, normal-ish, teenage wizard. It told him that he had a weapon that Voldemort didn't know about, couldn't plan for, and couldn't defend against. I'm not stopping, Harry said. Harry, Sirius, there's a war coming. Dumbledore won't tell me anything, the Ministry is pretending everything's fine, and Voldemort is out there right now building an army. I watched him come back. I watched him kill Cedric like it was nothing. And the next time I face him, and there will be a next time, we both know that, I am not going to stand there and just survive. I'm going to be something he didn't plan for. Sirius looked at him through the mirror. And what happened next surprised Harry more than the Nundu had. His godfather smiled. Sad and proud and scared all at once. Your mother, Sirius said softly, would have said the exact same thing. That tone and everything. James would have charged in grinning. Lily would have stared you down and said, I'm not stopping, in exactly that voice, and God help anyone who tried to argue with her. Harry didn't trust his voice for a moment. Okay, Sirius said. Okay. But we do this right. I'm going to send you everything I can find about Nundus. Behavior, biology, magical properties, everything. And you practice control before you practice transformation. You learn what this thing is before you try to become it. Promise me that. I promise. And Harry? Don't tell anyone. Not Ron, not Hermione, not Dumbledore. Not yet. A Nundu animagus is, the ministry would lock you in a cell and throw away the key. There are people who would kill you just for the possibility. Understood? Get some sleep. Yeah. I mean it. Sleep. Good night, Sirius. Harry put the mirror away, lay back on his bed, and stared at the ceiling for approximately 4 hours. Sleep was not happening tonight. The rest of July and the first half of August became the most focused period of Harry's life. Every night, after the Dursleys went to bed, Harry sat on his floor and went inward. Down through the layers of his mind, past the grief and the anger, they were still there, they'd always be there, but he'd learned to move through them like walking through fog, and into the dark place where the Nundu waited. He didn't try to transform. Not yet. Sirius had been very clear about that, and for once, Harry listened. Instead, he sat with it. Observed it. Got to know the shape of the thing that lived in his magical core. And slowly, over dozens of sessions, he began to understand what the Nundu was. It wasn't mindless. That was the first thing he realized, and it shocked him, because the textbooks made Nundus sound like walking biological weapons with the intelligence of a particularly angry rhinoceros. But the thing inside Harry, thought. Not in words, not in human concepts, but in impressions. Territories. Boundaries. It understood threat and safety, dominance and submission, and, this was the part that fascinated Harry, restraint. The Nundu was the most dangerous creature in the wizarding world not because it couldn't control its power but because it chose when to unleash it. A Nundu didn't breathe death on everything it encountered. It was selective. Precise. It killed when it needed to kill, and the rest of the time, it simply was, this enormous, silent, patient thing, padding through the darkness of the African interior, and every magical creature within 5 miles felt it and went somewhere else, not because the Nundu was hunting them but because they understood, on a bone-deep primal level, that they were in the presence of something apex. Harry found that, oddly comforting. It wasn't a berserker. It wasn't a mindless weapon. It was, in its own alien way, disciplined. I can work with this, Harry thought, and felt the Nundu's acknowledgement roll through him like a deep, thrumming purr that vibrated in his teeth. The physical research came through Sirius in batches. Handwritten compilations from Grimmauld Place's frankly disturbing library, cross-referenced with notes from Remus Lupin, who Sirius had apparently roped in with some cover story about theoretical research. The Nundu's breath, Harry learned, wasn't a single thing. It was a spectrum. At its least intense, it was a miasma, a heavy, greenish mist that caused disorientation and mild illness. Think of it like the Nundu equivalent of a warning growl. At its most intense, it was a concentrated exhalation of what magizoologists called terminus vapor, raw magical negation that didn't just kill living things but unmade them. Stripped the magic out of enchantments. Dissolved dark creatures. Crumbled stone that had been reinforced by centuries of magical maintenance. One researcher, a slightly unhinged Amazonian magizoologist from the 1800s named Emilia Batista, had theorized that the Nundu's breath was the magical ecosystem's failsafe. A reset button. When dark magic accumulated too densely in an area, when cursed objects and dark creatures and corrupted ley lines built up past a critical threshold, a Nundu would eventually wander through and just, clean house. Breathe it away. Start fresh. The Nundu, Batista had written, does not merely kill. It clarifies. It is the silence after the scream, the dawn after the endless night. One might argue that the Nundu is not dark at all, but rather the natural predator of darkness itself. Harry read that passage at 3 in the morning and felt something click into place inside his chest like a key turning in a lock. The natural predator of darkness itself. And Voldemort, the man who had styled himself the Lord of Darkness, had no idea what was growing inside Harry Potter. September came, and with it, Hogwarts. But Hogwarts in Harry's 5th year felt nothing like the castle he remembered. The magic was still there, the moving staircases, the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall, the ghosts drifting through walls, but there was a film over everything now. A grayness. And that grayness had a name, Dolores Umbridge. Harry hated her from the first defense against the dark arts lesson. Not just because of the simpering voice and the pink cardigan and the hem that sounded like a toad choking on a doily. Not just because she called him a liar in front of the entire class when he said Voldemort was back. Not even because of the detention she gave him with a quill that carved words into the back of his hand while she sat there smiling, drinking tea from a cup with kittens on it, watching a 15-year-old boy bleed and write. He hated her because she was small. Because Voldemort was out there building an army of dark wizards and Dementors and God knew what else, and the Ministry's response was to send this petty, bureaucratic, sadistic little woman to make sure the children of Hogwarts couldn't learn to defend themselves. It was so absurdly, insanely wrong that Harry sometimes wanted to laugh. Instead, he focused. The room of requirement became his sanctuary. The D.A., Dumbledore's army, named with a defiance that made Harry's chest tight with something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite grief, met 3 times a week, and Harry taught them. Patron uses and shield charms and stunning spells and everything Umbridge refused to let them learn in class. And it was good. It was important. These people trusted him, and he wasn't going to let them down. But after the DA sessions ended, after everyone else had filed out through the door that became a broom closet or a bathroom or a stretch of blank wall depending on who was watching, Harry stayed. And he practiced becoming the beast. The room of requirement, it turned out, was uniquely suited for this. Harry would pace before the wall 3 times, thinking, I need a place to safely practice a dangerous magical transformation, and the room would provide, something that definitely wasn't in the standard Hogwarts floor plan. A vast space, easily the size of a Quidditch pitch, with walls that seemed to absorb force and a floor that rebuilt itself when damaged and a ceiling that stretched up into shadows that might have been darkness or might have been infinity. The room wanted to help. Harry could feel it, the castle's ancient magic reaching toward him like a curious hand, sensing the Nundu and responding with something that felt almost like recognition. Yes, the castle seemed to say. I remember this. It's been a long time. A Potter ancestor, Harry thought. Here. Centuries ago. Doing exactly what he was doing now. The transformation itself was nothing like the textbooks described for standard animagi. There was no incantation. No wand movement. No potion needed. The bestial awakening was about permission. About opening the door inside yourself and letting the animal through. The first time Harry managed a partial transformation, just his right hand, just for a second, he stared at the massive, tawny-furred paw that had replaced his fingers, each claw as long as a bread knife, and felt the world tilt on its axis. It was real. It was actually real. The paw dissolved back into his hand after about 3 seconds and Harry sat down hard on the floor, breathing like he'd just run a marathon, grinning so wide his face hurt. Over the following weeks, he pushed further. An arm. A leg. His spine reshaping, vertebrae popping and reforming as the Nundu's massive frame tried to express itself through a body that was far, far too small for it. It hurt. God, it hurt. Not the sharp pain of the blood quill, Harry shoved that thought away, but a deep, structural ache, like his skeleton was arguing with itself about what shape it should be. And then there was the breath. The first time Harry accidentally released the Nundu's breath in human form, he was working on a shoulder transformation and something slipped. A connection he hadn't meant to make, a channel opening between the beast's lungs and his own, and suddenly Harry exhaled a thin stream of greenish vapor that drifted across the room of requirement and hit the far wall and the stone turned gray and crumbled like wet sand. Harry clamped his mouth shut so hard his teeth clicked. He stared at the damaged wall. The room was already repairing it, stones knitting back together like time running backwards, but for a moment, there'd been a hole. A foot-wide hole in magical stone that had stood for 1,000 years, dissolved by a breath. A single, unfocused, barely there breath. Okay, Harry whispered to the empty room. Okay. That's something we need to be really, really careful about. The Nundu inside him purred. It sounded smug. The Mrs. Norris incident happened on a Thursday. Harry was leaving the room of requirement after a late-night practice session, exhausted and wrung out, his magic buzzing under his skin like a live wire that hadn't quite settled back into its normal configuration. The transformation practice always left him like this, slightly too much for his own body, the Nundu's energy leaking through cracks in his control like smoke under a door. He was halfway down a 7th-floor corridor, thinking about nothing in particular, when Mrs. Norris appeared from around a corner and looked at him. Just looked at him. Lamp-like yellow eyes in a dusty, skeletal face. The most hated cat in Hogwarts history, and she was staring at Harry with an expression that was, for once, not accusatory or smug or, "I'm about to go fetch Filch." She was terrified. Mrs. Norris's fur stood on end. Her back arched. She hissed, a thin, desperate sound, nothing like her usual confident growl, and then she turned to run. And Harry felt something pulse out of him. Not the breath. Not exactly. More like the aura. The ambient pressure of the Nundu's presence that he hadn't learned to fully suppress yet. It hit Mrs. Norris like a wave, and the cat crumpled. Just dropped. Mid-stride, legs folding, body hitting the stone floor with a soft, awful thump. Harry's heart stopped. He ran to her. She was breathing. Barely. Her eyes were glazed, her body rigid, and there was a faint greenish tinge to the air around her that was already dissipating. Harry scooped her up, she weighed almost nothing, all bones and ratty fur, and felt for the flutter of her heartbeat against his palm. Still there. Weak, but there. No, 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 Harry breathed. He held the cat against his chest and pulled. Pulled the Nundu's energy back inside himself, slammed the internal door shut with every ounce of willpower he had, compressed the beast down into the dark space where it lived and locked it there. Mrs. Norris shuddered. Gasped, a tiny, wheezing feline gasp. Her eyes refocused. She looked up at Harry, and for one bizarre moment, there was something in her gaze that might have been gratitude. Then she bit him on the thumb and bolted. Harry stood in the corridor, bleeding slightly, heart hammering, and thought, I almost killed Filch's cat with my presence. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and didn't sleep, and in the morning, when Filch appeared at breakfast carrying a slightly dazed Mrs. Norris and muttering about students and their hexes, Harry stared at his porridge and said nothing and felt sick. He needed more control. He needed it yesterday. Daphne Greengrass noticed him 3 days after the Mrs. Norris incident, and the way she noticed him told Harry that she'd probably been watching for longer than that. It happened in potions. Snape's dungeon, which was never anyone's idea of a good time, but especially not Harry's, because Snape seemed to have entered a new phase of hostility this year that went beyond mere dislike into something that felt almost desperate. Like the man was trying to provoke Harry into doing something unforgivable just to prove a point. Harry was grinding scarab beetles. The potion was some nonsense about draft of peace, ironic given that Harry hadn't felt peaceful since approximately 1981, when he felt it. A prickle on the back of his neck. The Nundu's senses bleeding through, the predator's awareness of being watched. He looked up. Daphne Greengrass was at the Slytherin table across the dungeon, and she was staring at him with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that might be dangerous. Not hostile. Not curious in the idle, gossip-seeking way of most students. Analytical. Clinical. Like she was taking him apart with her eyes and cataloging the pieces. She was tall for their year, with straight blonde hair pulled back in a practical knot and a face that could have been carved from marble, all clean lines and sharp angles, beautiful in the way that a well-made knife was beautiful. The kind of face that didn't waste energy on expressions it didn't mean. Slytherin's so-called Ice Queen, although Harry had always thought that was a stupid nickname because it told you more about the people using it than the person it described. Their eyes met. Held. And Harry felt something jolt through him, not the Nundu, not exactly, but something the Nundu recognized. A kinship of some kind. A resonance. Daphne's eyes narrowed. Just slightly. Then she looked back at her potion with a deliberation that said, very clearly, we're not done here. Harry went back to his scarab beetles and thought, what the hell was that? She cornered him 4 days later. Harry was leaving the library after a solo research session. He'd been looking up everything the Hogwarts collection had on Nundus, which was frustratingly little, when a voice from an alcove said, Potter. He turned. Daphne was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, bookbag over one shoulder, expression as unreadable as a sphinx. In the torchlight, her skin looked almost translucent, pale enough to see the blue veins at her temples. Greengrass, Harry said, because he wasn't sure what else to say. You're different this year. Everyone's different this year. Umbridge'll do that to you. Don't be flippant. You know what I mean. She pushed off the wall and walked toward him, and Harry was struck by the fact that she moved like someone who'd been trained to carry herself carefully. Each step measured. Controlled. Like she was rationing her energy. The magic around you has changed. It's heavier. Denser. 3 weeks ago, in potions, I felt it from across the room, and it made the curse in my blood sing. Harry went very still. Curse. Something flickered in Daphne's expression. Annoyance, maybe, at having revealed something she hadn't meant to. But she pressed on. My family carries a blood malediction. Ancient. Generational. It resonates with certain types of magic, particularly magic associated with death and transformation. Her chin lifted. Whatever you're carrying, Potter, it pinged my curse like a tuning fork. And I want to know what it is. Harry studied her. The Nundu inside him was alert, attentive, but not alarmed. If anything, it felt interested. Which was new. The beast had never reacted to another person before. Not like this. I don't know what you're talking about, Harry said. Yes, you do. Maybe I had a weird breakfast. Potter. She took another step closer, close enough now that Harry could see the faint, spidery lines of something dark running just beneath the skin of her left wrist. Veins that weren't quite the right color. The blood malediction, visible up close if you knew where to look. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm not Malfoy, I don't run to authority figures with gossip. I'm asking because whatever's happening to you is significant, and I've spent my entire life learning to read magical signatures because my survival depends on it. You're putting out a signature I've never encountered before. It's... She paused, searching for the word. Predatory. Not dark, not light. Just, lethal. And growing. She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that Harry recognized with a jolt. Not fear. Not curiosity. Recognition. Like she knew what it felt like to carry something deadly inside your body. Because she did. I can't tell you, Harry said. And for the first time, he was honest about it. Not a brush off. An acknowledgement that there was something to tell. Daphne regarded him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Once. Fair enough. But when you're ready, and you will be ready, because whatever this is, it's too big for one person, come find me. I might be able to help. She turned and walked away, and Harry watched her go and thought two things simultaneously. 1, she's going to figure it out on her own anyway. 2, the Nundu just purred for a person who isn't me, and I have absolutely no idea what to make of that. October bled into November, and Hogwarts got worse. Umbridge's educational decrees multiplied like cursed rabbits. No student organizations without approval. No teachers speaking on unapproved topics. No gatherings of 3 or more students without a ministry-sanctioned chaperone. The DA went deeper underground, meeting times and locations randomized, the enchanted galleons Hermione had created burning in people's pockets like tiny acts of rebellion. Harry taught. And trained. And barely slept. and pretended to be fine so successfully that even Ron and Hermione, who were perceptive in very different ways, only noticed that he seemed more focused this year. Which was true. He just couldn't tell them what he was focused on. The Nundu transformation progressed. Harry could now shift individual body parts almost at will, a hand becoming a paw, his eyes shifting to the Nundu's burning amber, his spine elongating and his muscles thickening as the beast's physical power flowed through him like electricity through a wire. He'd even managed a full-body transformation twice, although both times it had only lasted about 30 seconds before the strain of containing something that massive in the room of requirement forced him to shift back, gasping and trembling and feeling like he'd been turned inside out. Full form, the Nundu was enormous. That was the only word. Easily the size of a hippogriff, maybe bigger, with tawny fur that shifted color like light on water, a mane of shadow-dark smoke that wasn't quite solid and wasn't quite gas, and eyes that glowed a feral, incandescent green, not killing curse green. Harry had checked his reflection compulsively, but something older. Greener. The green of deep forests and ancient seas and things that grew in the dark. And the breath. God, the breath. Harry had practiced modulating it in the room of requirement. At its lightest, it was a faint mist that made enchantments in the immediate area flicker and reset. He'd accidentally decharmed a suit of armor and it had collapsed into a pile of scrap metal, much to his horror. At medium intensity, it dissolved dark magic on contact. He'd tested this by creating weak dark adjacent hexes on target dummies and watching his breath eat through them like acid through paper. He hadn't tested full intensity. He was afraid to. The room of requirement was tough, but Harry wasn't confident it could handle the Nundu's full exhalation, and explaining to Dumbledore why the 7th floor had been vaporized was not a conversation he wanted to have. But he was getting better. Tighter. More controlled. The beast and the boy were learning to coexist, learning the boundaries of the space they shared, and every day the connection got smoother, more instinctive, less like wrestling a dragon and more like dancing with one. The Nundu's senses bled through more often now, even when Harry wasn't actively transforming. He could smell magic, actually smell it, like a physical scent. Light magic smelled clean, like rain and ozone. Dark magic smelled rancid, like rot and old blood. Umbridge's quill, when he'd been forced into another detention and she'd laid it on the desk in front of him, had smelled so strongly of blood magic and suffering that Harry had nearly gagged. He'd done the detention. Gritted his teeth through the pain. And when he'd left, he'd walked past a window and seen his reflection and for just a second, just a flash, his eyes had been amber instead of green. He was changing. Not just learning to transform. Changing. The Nundu was becoming part of him in a way that went beyond animagus magic. And he couldn't decide if that scared him or not. The Hogsmeade attack happened on the first Saturday of December. It started as a normal visit. Snow on the ground, students bundled in scarves and hats, the village looking like a Christmas card come to life. Harry was walking down the main street with Ron and Hermione, who were arguing about whether Honeydook's new fizzing whiz-bees were better than the original recipe, the kind of aggressively normal teenage conversation that Harry cherished precisely because of how rare normalcy had become. He was halfway through a butterbeer at the Three Broomsticks when he felt it. Cold. Not the cold of December. Not wind chill or snow or an open door letting in a draft. This was the other cold. The one that reached inside your chest and wrapped its fingers around whatever warmth lived there and squeezed. The cold that came with whispered voices and fading light and the certainty that you would never, ever be happy again. Harry set his butterbeer down so hard it sloshed. Dementors. Ron looked at him. What? Where? I don't feel, they're coming. A lot of them. From the north. Harry stood up, and the entire pub seemed to shift around him as his senses expanded. The Nundu's awareness layering over his own, painting the world in new dimensions. He could feel them, dark, empty, hungry shapes gliding toward the village like holes cut in the fabric of reality. Dozens. Maybe more. Ron, get people inside. Hermione, send a Patronus to Dumbledore. Now. They stared at him for exactly 1 second, saw something in his expression that killed any argument, and moved. Hermione's wand was out before she'd finished standing, a silver otter bursting from the tip and streaking through the wall like a bullet. Ron was already shouting at people to get inside, his prefect's badge suddenly useful in a way that had nothing to do with monitoring hallway traffic. Harry walked outside. The street was emptying fast, students and villagers scrambling for doorways and shops, but not fast enough. Harry could see them now, dark shapes cresting the hill at the north end of the village, dozens of ragged, floating forms silhouetted against the grey December sky. Dementors. More than he'd ever seen in one place, even at the Quidditch match in 3rd year, even at the lake. This wasn't a patrol. This was a swarm. And they were heading straight for the village. Other people were seeing them now. Screams. Panicked running. A younger student, 2nd year, Hufflepuff, Harry thought, tripped and went down in the snow, and Harry caught her arm and hauled her to her feet and pushed her toward the 3 broomsticks. Inside. Go. The cold was intensifying. Harry could feel it pressing against his skin like physical weight, and underneath it, the familiar crawl of his worst memories. His mother screaming. The flash of green light. Cedric's body. The graveyard. Voldemort's laugh. But underneath those memories, deeper, something else was stirring. The Nundu. And the Nundu wasn't afraid. The Nundu didn't feel cold. The Nundu felt the approaching Dementors, and its reaction wasn't fear or despair, it was something Harry had never felt from the beast before. Contempt. Raw, predatory contempt. The Nundu regarding the Dementors the way a lion might regard a particularly aggressive mouse. Not threatened. Offended. These things, these hollow, parasitic, scavenging things, were entering its territory, and the beast found them pathetic. The first wave of Dementors reached the edge of the village, and the temperature dropped so fast that Harry saw his butterbeer freeze solid through the pub window. Expecto Patronum, someone shouted behind him, multiple voices, DA members who'd practiced this exact spell under Harry's instruction, and silver shapes erupted into the air. A terrier, a boar, something that might have been a fox. They charged the Dementors and held them back, but only just, because there were so many, the sky was darkening with them, and the patron uses were struggling. Harry raised his wand. He could cast his Stag Patronus, it was his strongest spell, his most reliable defense. He should cast it. That was the smart move. The safe move. But the Nundu was roaring inside him. Not physically. The sound existed only in Harry's head, a bass rumble that shook the foundations of his mind, and the message was clear and primal and absolutely non-negotiable: let me out. Not all the way. Harry wasn't going to fully transform on the main street of Hogsmeade with witnesses everywhere. But there was something else he could do. Something he'd been practicing. A partial channeling, not the full transformation, not the full breath, just a directed pulse of the Nundu's essence through his own body. He'd never done it outside the room of requirement. He didn't know if it would work the same way. He didn't know what would happen. The Dementors pushed through the Patronus line. A silver fox flickered and died. The boar was struggling. Screams from behind him, students who were being overwhelmed by the despair aura, younger kids collapsing in the street as their worst memories consumed them. Screw it. Harry opened the door. Not all the way. Just a crack. Just enough for the Nundu's breath to flow up through his chest, past his heart, into his lungs. He exhaled. It wasn't visible. Not quite. Just a faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze, rolling outward from Harry in an expanding wave. It smelled like ozone and deep forest and something else, something ancient and absolute, and it hit the nearest Dementor like a freight train. The Dementor recoiled. Harry had seen Dementors driven back by patron uses before. This was different. A Patronus pushed them away, rejected them, held them at bay with positive emotion. What Harry's breath did was, it wasn't rejection. It was dominance. The Nundu's essence hit the Dementor and the creature didn't just retreat. It flinched. The way a dog flinches from fire. The way anything with the capacity for self-preservation flinches from something that can unmake it. Then the wave reached the rest of the swarm. For one frozen moment, dozens of Dementors hung in the air like dark question marks, and Harry could feel their collective attention turn toward him. Could feel them tasting the air, trying to understand what they were sensing. And then he felt something he hadn't known Dementors could feel. Fear. Raw, animal, overwhelming fear. The swarm broke. Not retreated, broke, the way a flock of birds breaks when a hawk appears. Dementors scattered in every direction, some of them actually colliding with each other in their haste to get away, dark robes tangling, skeletal hands scrabbling at the air. They fled north, south, east, up, anywhere that was away from the boy standing in the street with haze rolling off his skin and something terrible burning behind his green eyes. In 30 seconds, the sky was clear. The cold was gone. The village was silent except for the soft sound of snow falling and someone, somewhere, crying with relief. Harry closed the door inside himself. Sealed it. Pressed his hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow from its frantic gallop to something approaching normal. His hands were shaking. People were emerging from buildings, staring at the empty sky. The DA members who'd been fighting were looking at each other in confusion, their patron users had still been struggling when the Dementors suddenly fled. They didn't understand what had happened. Ron appeared at Harry's shoulder. Mate. What the hell? Did your Patronus do that? I didn't even see you cast it. Yeah, Harry said, because he couldn't say the truth. Yeah, I threw everything I had into it. Guess it worked. Ron clapped him on the back, grinning with relief, and Harry smiled and felt like a liar. He didn't see Daphne until later. She was standing at the corner of tomes and scrolls, half hidden by a stone archway, and she was looking at Harry with an expression that was equal parts understanding and dread and something else that he couldn't identify. She'd seen it. Not the Patronus lie. The real thing. The shimmer in the air. The way the Dementors had reacted. She'd felt it, her blood malediction resonating with the Nundu's death essence like a tuning fork struck against a bell. She knew. Across the snowy street, their eyes met. Harry waited for the accusation. The horror. The "what are you?" Daphne gave him the smallest nod he'd ever seen. An acknowledgement. A promise to keep silent. And underneath both of those things, clear as daylight in her steady, gray-blue eyes, we need to talk. They talked 2 days later, in an empty classroom on the 4th floor that Daphne had secured with a silencing charm and 3 separate ward spells that she cast with the practiced ease of someone who'd been protecting her privacy for years. Nundu, she said, before Harry had even closed the door. He stopped. Turned. How? My family's curse is a detection system for death magic. It's not voluntary. When something with a lethal magical signature gets close enough, I feel it in my blood. Literally. The veins darken, the curse activates, like it's trying to respond to a kindred energy. She pushed up her left sleeve, and Harry saw the spidery dark lines he'd glimpsed before, more visible now, branching from her wrist up toward her elbow. When you did whatever you did in Hogsmeade, my entire left arm went black for about 10 seconds. It's never done that before. Not even when I was in the same room as a cursed artifact that killed my great-aunt. Harry sat down heavily on a desk. I'm sorry. I didn't know it would affect, don't apologize. I'm not hurt. It actually felt. She paused, frowning, like the words were strange in her mouth. Clarifying. Like the curse was being shown its place. Reminded that there are bigger predators. She looked at him. How long? Since this summer. Animagus transformation. The bestial awakening. Harry blinked. You know about, my family is old blood, Potter. Not as old as yours, but old enough to have records of things the ministry pretends don't exist. The bestial awakening is one of them. It's banned, technically. Has been since 1644 when a witch in Cornwall woke up a basilisk form and accidentally petrified half her village. Daphne sat on the desk opposite him, legs crossed, posture perfect, looking for all the world like they were discussing homework assignments. A Nundu, though. There hasn't been a Nundu animagus in recorded history. There might have been one. A Potter ancestor. The records are lost. Of course it would be a Potter. Something that might have been humor flickered in her expression. Your family has always had more magic than sense. Thanks. It wasn't an insult. Sense is overrated. Sense would have told you to stop the process when you realized what was growing inside you, and then Hogsmeade would have gone very differently 2 days ago. She leaned forward slightly. How much control do you have? Harry considered lying. Considered downplaying it. But Daphne was looking at him with those sharp, steady eyes, and the Nundu inside him was doing the purring thing again, the thing it only did for her, and Harry realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that he was tired of carrying this alone. Partial transformation, yes. I can shift individual body parts, and I've managed full form twice in the room of requirement. The breath I can modulate, light mist to concentrated blast, but I haven't tested full intensity because I'm pretty sure it would blow a hole in the castle. The passive aura is what I'm worst at controlling. I nearly killed Filch's cat by walking past her. Daphne absorbed this without blinking. You need a control anchor. A what? Something external that helps you manage the beast's influence when your internal control isn't enough. Werewolves use wolfsbane potion. Metamorph magi have focus objects. Animagi with dangerous forms, and yours is about as dangerous as they come, historically used bonded partners. Someone whose magical signature the beast recognized as safe. Pack. Not prey. The Nundu purred again, louder, and Harry felt heat rise in his face because the implication was not subtle. The beast has already identified me, Daphne said matter-of-factly, like she was reading an essay conclusion she'd reached independently. That's why my curse responds the way it does. It's not just detecting death magic. It's interacting with it. Your Nundu's signature and my blood malediction are on the same frequency, more or less. Different expressions of the same type of deep magic. So, what are you saying? I'm saying I can help you, and in return, your presence seems to suppress my curse's progression. When your Nundu's aura washed over me in Hogsmeade, the dark veins receded further than they have in 2 years of expensive treatment. Whatever you're putting out, it's eating the curse the way it ate those Dementor's fear. Harry stared at her. My presence helps your curse. Don't get a big head about it, Potter. It's a magical interaction, not a compliment. But there was the faintest softening at the corners of her mouth, and Harry thought, not for the first time, that the Ice Queen title was the most inaccurate nickname in the history of Hogwarts. And so they began. It started as purely practical. They met in the room of requirement, Daphne 3 nights a week, Harry every night, and worked on control. Daphne was, Harry quickly discovered, terrifyingly intelligent and absolutely relentless in her expectations. Shift your right hand. Now your left. Now both. Now add the eyes. Hold it. Hold it, Potter, don't you dare let those claws retract. I'm trying, the tendons don't, the tendons are magic, they'll do what you tell them. You're not reshaping bone, you're reshaping your magical projection of bone. Stop thinking like a human and start thinking like the beast. She was right. She was always right, which was infuriating. But under her guidance, Harry's control improved faster than it had in months of solo practice. Having someone there, someone who could see the Nundu's aura, could tell him when it was leaking and where, could literally feel the breath's intensity through her curse, turned vague, instinctive practice into precise, measurable training. And something else was happening too. Something neither of them acknowledged directly but both of them noticed. They were becoming attuned to each other. It started with small things. Harry knowing when Daphne's curse was flaring up before she mentioned it, a tightness in his chest, the Nundu's awareness zeroing in on the dark magic in her blood like a wolf scenting a wound. Daphne knowing when Harry was losing control before the aura became visible, a shift in her expression, a steady hand on his arm, her magic pressing against his like a cool compress on a fever. They developed a shorthand. A vocabulary of glances and gestures that communicated faster than words. Harry would feel the beast surging and look at Daphne and she'd raise one eyebrow, "I see it, rein it in," and he'd pull back. Daphne's curse would darken her veins past the elbow and Harry would shift his aura, just slightly, letting a controlled trickle of the Nundu's energy wash over her, and the darkness would retreat. It was symbiotic. Mutual. And the trust it required was unlike anything Harry had experienced. "You're the only person who's touched the Nundu form without being afraid," Harry said one night, sitting on the floor of the room of requirement, human again, drained from a full-body transformation that had lasted almost 3 minutes. Daphne was sitting next to him, her back against the same wall, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. She'd been monitoring his aura during the transformation, guiding him through the shifts in intensity, and she looked nearly as exhausted as he felt. "I wasn't not afraid," she said quietly. "The first time you showed me. In this room. When you shifted fully and I saw." She trailed off. "You're the size of a small dragon, Potter. Your mane is literally made of toxic smoke. Your eyes glow. It would be insane not to be afraid. But you touched me anyway. I touched you because I was afraid." She turned her head to look at him, and in the dim light of the room of requirement, her face was softer than he'd ever seen it. Open. Real. "My whole life, people have looked at my curse and either pitied me or been afraid. Poor Daphne, walking death sentence. Keep your distance, the Greengrass girl's blood is poison. I learned very young that fear makes people stupid and distance makes them cruel, and I decided I wasn't going to be either of those things. So when I saw your beast form and felt afraid, I reached out and touched you because I refused to let fear make my decisions." Harry looked at her. At the dark lines just visible at her wrist. At the steady gray blue of her eyes. At the jaw set with the kind of stubbornness that could move mountains or topple governments depending on the direction it was pointed. "You're kind of terrifying yourself," he said, and meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. The corner of her mouth twitched. "Thank you, Potter." "Harry." "What?" "My name's Harry. You've been elbow deep in my Nundu aura 3 nights a week for 2 months. I think first names are appropriate." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Harry. Testing it. Finding its shape." "Fine. But only in private. Publicly, you're still Potter, because I have a reputation to maintain. The Ice Queen thing. It keeps people at a comfortable distance. Is that what you want? Comfortable distance?" She looked at him again, and something shifted in her expression. Something warm and uncertain and very, very human. "It's what I used to want," she said. "I'm less sure now." They sat in silence for a while after that, shoulders not quite touching, and Harry thought about connections and anchors and the strange, impossible fact that the most dangerous thing inside him had led him to someone who made him feel less dangerous, and more real, and more himself than anyone he'd ever known. The Nundu purred contentedly, and for once, Harry let it. The real test came in mid-December. Umbridge, in her infinite wisdom, and Harry used that phrase the way someone might use, pleasant aroma, to describe a garbage fire, had decided to personally investigate the Hogsmeade incident. The Ministry's official line was that the Dementors had been confused by unusual weather patterns, and had left of their own accord. Nobody with functioning brain cells believed this, but since when had that stopped the Ministry? But Umbridge was suspicious. Harry could tell from the way she looked at him in class, those toad-like eyes tracking his every movement, the quill in her hand twitching like she was dying to write something incriminating. She'd been told that Harry had been in Hogsmeade during the attack, and that several students had reported seeing him on the street doing something with his wand, before the Dementors fled. The fact that no one could describe what he'd actually done, there'd been no visible Patronus, no shouted incantation, bothered her. Harry kept his head down. Went to class. Did his homework. Attended DA meetings where he very carefully taught everyone how to cast patron uses and absolutely did not demonstrate any alternative methods of Dementor repulsion. And then Umbridge brought in a Dementor. It was during a special assessment, announced with exactly 0 warning on a Wednesday morning. The entire 5th year was gathered in the Great Hall, which had been cleared of its usual tables and rearranged into a formal examination layout. Umbridge stood at the front in her pink cardigan, flanked by 2 Aurors who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else, and between the Aurors was a containment unit, a large, rune-inscribed iron box that pulsed with cold. "Today," Umbridge said, her voice carrying that high, girlish sweetness that made Harry want to claw his own ears off, "we will be assessing each student's defensive capabilities against dark creatures. The Ministry has graciously provided a controlled specimen for this purpose." She opened the box. The cold hit like a wall. Students gasped, staggered. Someone in the back started crying. The Dementor rose from the containment unit like smoke from a fire, dark robes unfurling, and even restrained, Harry could see the chain of enchantments binding it, silver runes glowing along its wrists. It radiated despair. The great hall's enchanted ceiling flickered, the illusory sky clouding over as if the castle itself recoiled. "Each student will approach the specimen and cast a defensive spell," Umbridge continued, apparently unbothered by the wave of misery rolling through the room. "Those who fail to produce adequate results will receive remedial instruction." She was looking directly at Harry when she said it. "She wants to see what I do," Harry realized. "She's testing me specifically. She probably set this whole thing up because of Hogsmeade." The students went one by one. Some managed patron uses, weaker than they'd shown in DA meetings, because the Dementor was right there, not a theoretical exercise, and the cold was sapping concentration. Some couldn't produce anything and retreated, shaking. Ron managed a faint silver shield. Hermione got her otter, but it was translucent, flickering. Neville squared his shoulders and produced a Patronus that Harry hadn't seen before, a solid silver lion that charged the Dementor and drove it back 2 feet, and the look on Neville's face afterward was something Harry would remember for a very long time. Then it was Harry's turn. He walked to the front of the room. The Dementor swayed behind its chain of runes, eyeless face turning toward him, and Harry felt the cold reach into his chest and the Nundu slammed against its cage. Not subtly. Not the gentle stirring of a beast recognizing prey. This was a full-body convulsion of predatory fury, the Nundu's awareness crashing through Harry's defenses with a force that made his vision flicker amber for a split second. Because the Dementor wasn't just a dark creature to the Nundu. It was an abomination. A parasite. Something that fed on joy and hope and life, and every instinct in the Nundu's ancient, primal brain screamed destroy it. Harry grabbed the internal door with both metaphorical hands and held on for dear life. Not here. Not now. Umbridge is watching. The whole school is watching. You cannot breathe here. The Nundu snarled. Harry's knuckles whitened on his wand. Is there a problem, Mr. Potter? Umbridge asked sweetly. No problem, Harry said through gritted teeth. He raised his wand. Expecto Patronum. The stag erupted from his wand, massive and bright, brighter than anyone else's had been because Harry's magical core was supercharged by the Nundu's fury. It charged the Dementor with such force that the creature was slammed back into its containment unit, silver antlers tossing, hooves striking. The Dementor shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and the containment box snapped shut. The great hall erupted in applause. The Aurors looked impressed. Umbridge looked, calculating. And the Dementor, sealed back in its box, was making a sound Harry was pretty sure only he could hear. A low, keening wail. Not anger. Not hunger. Terror. It had felt the Nundu behind the Patronus. It had sensed what Harry really was, just for a moment, through the crack in his control. And it was afraid. A creature that fed on fear was itself afraid. Harry walked back to his place in line, and Daphne, who was standing 3 rows back among the Slytherins, met his eyes across the great hall with an expression that said, very clearly, that was close. It was. Too close. But also, standing there with the Nundu still rumbling in his chest and the Dementor's fear still ringing in his ears, Harry felt something that had been building all semester finally crystallize into certainty. He could do this. Not just the transformation, not just the control, but this. The whole thing. Whatever was coming, Voldemort, the war, the Dementors, all of it, Harry could face it. Because he wasn't just a boy with a scar and a wand and a prophecy he didn't fully understand. He was the Nundu. And Dementors, creatures that had haunted his worst nightmares since he was 13, that had nearly killed him twice, that had made him relive his mother's death over and over and over, Dementors were afraid of him. The irony tasted like victory. That night, Harry sat in the room of requirement with Daphne, Neville, who had been brought into the secret 2 weeks prior after accidentally walking in on Harry mid-transformation and, instead of running, had said, "Bloody hell, is that a Nundu?" with the tone of someone asking about the weather, and the two-way mirror propped up on a desk showing Sirius's worried face. "She's suspicious," Sirius said, meaning Umbridge. "The Dementor test was a trap. She wanted to see if you do something unusual. I gave her a Patronus. You gave her a Patronus that nearly destroyed the containment unit. That's going to raise questions. So what do we do?" Neville asked. He was sitting on the floor with his wand in his hands, turning it between his fingers. He'd taken to carrying it everywhere since the Dementor exercise, and Harry understood why. Neville's Patronus, a lion, had been a revelation, proof of something Neville had been trying to believe about himself for years, and he wasn't about to let that feeling go. "We can't stop training. Not with everything that's happening out there." "We don't stop," Harry said. "But we're more careful. Daphne, can you extend your ward spells? Make the room of requirement harder to detect from outside?" "Already done. I added a layer last week. Even Dumbledore would have to look twice to notice we're in here." She paused. "Though I suspect Dumbledore has looked twice at you several times this year and chosen not to comment." Harry thought about that. About the headmaster's blue eyes watching him at meals, the slight tilt of his head, the way Dumbledore hadn't asked Harry a single question about Hogsmeade despite certainly knowing more than the official story. "Let him look," Harry said. "I'll talk to him when I'm ready. Right now, I need to finish learning control." "And then?" Sirius asked through the mirror. Harry looked at the mirror. At his godfather's gaunt, beloved face. At Neville, steady and brave and growing into something remarkable. At Daphne, who carried death in her blood and chose life every single day and who had, without either of them quite planning it, become the most important person in Harry's world. "Then we get ready," Harry said. "Because Voldemort is out there, and he's going to make a move, and when he does, I want to be the thing he never saw coming." Sirius smiled, and it was the saddest, proudest smile Harry had ever seen. "Lily's boy," he said softly. "Through and through." The room of requirement hummed around them. The castle's old magic, older than any of them, older than Dumbledore, old enough to remember Potters who carried beasts beneath their skin and walked through darkness without flinching. Harry felt the Nundu settle in his chest. Patient. Powerful. Waiting. Soon, he told it. Soon. The beast purred. And somewhere in the North Sea, on a rock fortress surrounded by dark water and darker magic, 1,000 Dementors circled Azkaban in their endless, hungry patrol. They didn't know what was coming for them. They didn't know that a boy in a Scottish castle was learning to breathe death, and that when the time came, he would walk into their stronghold and exhale, and the world would never be the same. But some part of them, some ancient, animal part buried deep in whatever passed for a Dementor's soul, felt something. A tremor in the dark. A vibration in the magic of the world. Like a predator's footfall, distant but approaching. And for the first time in their eternal, parasitic existence, the Dementors of Azkaban felt the smallest, coldest sliver of something they had only ever inflicted on others. Fear. Chapter 2, What Breathes in Darkness. Chapter 2, What Breathes in Darkness. The fallout from Hogsmeade was, in Harry's professional opinion, an absolute circus. Not the fun kind with cotton candy and acrobats. The ministry kind, where grown adults in expensive robes spent 3 weeks arguing about what had happened while very carefully avoiding the truth because the truth was inconvenient, and Cornelius Fudge had built his entire political career on the principle that inconvenient truths were best handled by pretending they didn't exist and then blaming someone else when they exploded in your face. The Daily Prophet ran 6 different versions of the story in 6 days. Monday, Dementor migration pattern causes minor disturbance in Hogsmeade. Tuesday, Ministry confirms weather anomaly responsible for Dementor confusion. Wednesday, Potter spotted at scene of Hogsmeade incident, coincidence or cause? Thursday, Senior Undersecretary Umbridge to investigate Hogsmeade irregularities. Friday, Dumbledore's failure, are Hogwarts students safe? And Saturday, the one that really made Harry's blood boil, Harry Potter, attention-seeking hero or dangerous liability? Ron had ripped that last one in half over breakfast, which was satisfying but didn't actually solve anything. The real problem wasn't the press. The real problem was Umbridge, who had latched onto the Hogsmeade incident like a lamprey onto a shark and was not letting go. Her investigation consisted primarily of pulling students out of class for individual questioning, always with that sweet smile, always with that sugar-pink quill scratching notes onto minister letterhead parchment, and asking them, over and over, what they'd seen Harry Potter do. Nobody had a good answer, which infuriated her. He was just standing there, Seamus Finnegan told Harry after his questioning, looking bewildered. That's what I said. You were standing in the street and the Dementors left. She asked me 5 different ways if I'd seen you cast a spell and I kept saying no because I didn't. She did not enjoy that. She asked me if you'd used any unusual magical objects, Hermione reported, her lips thin with anger. I told her the only unusual magical object at Hogwarts was her quill. She gave me a week's detention. Harry felt a stab of guilt at that. Hermione, you didn't have to. Oh, shut up. I wanted to. She pushed her hair out of her face, eyes blazing. That woman is a menace, Harry. She's not investigating the Hogsmeade attack to understand what happened. She's investigating it to find something to use against you. Against Dumbledore. Against anyone who contradicts the Ministry's narrative. She was right, and they all knew it, and knowing it didn't help because Umbridge had the weight of the Ministry behind her and the Ministry had the weight of fear behind it, and fear was the heaviest thing in the world. Well. Almost the heaviest. Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room that night, staring at the fire, and thought about weight. The weight of Umbridge's investigation. The weight of the DA, 30-odd students who trusted him to teach them how to survive. The weight of the Nundu, growing stronger every day, pressing against the inside of his skin like something too large for its container. And the weight of the thing he hadn't told anyone yet. The thing the Nundu had shown him during their last training session, 2 nights ago, that had left Harry sitting on the floor of the room of requirement for 20 minutes, not moving, barely breathing, trying to understand what it meant. The Nundu could sense dark magic. Harry had known that. But during that session, the beast's awareness had expanded beyond the room of requirement, beyond the castle, spreading outward like ripples in a pond, and Harry had felt, distant but unmistakable, like a stain on the edge of his consciousness, a massive, pulsing concentration of dark magic to the north. Not Voldemort. He knew what Voldemort's signature felt like, the cold-hot burn of it, the wrongness. This was different. This was older, colder, and impossibly vast. A structure saturated with centuries of suffering, despair, and dark enchantment, surrounded by water and wind and the circling presence of hundreds, hundreds, of Dementors. Azkaban. Harry had felt Azkaban the way a wolf might scent a rival pack's territory. Distant. Dangerous. But not untouchable. The Nundu had regarded that dark stain on the horizon, and its reaction had been the same contempt it had shown in Hogsmeade, the same predatory dismissal, but amplified 1,000-fold. Nest of parasites, the beast's awareness had communicated, in impressions rather than words. Corruption. Stagnation. A wound in the world that has been allowed to fester. And then, clearer than anything the Nundu had ever communicated, I could clean it. Harry had pulled himself out of the trance and sat there, shaking, and thought about what it would mean to walk into Azkaban and breathe. He hadn't told anyone. Not Daphne, not Sirius, not Neville. Because the idea was insane. Suicidally insane. He was 15 years old and still learning to hold his full transformation for more than 5 minutes, and the idea of going up against a fortress full of Dementors was, "Exactly what you've been preparing for," whispered a voice in his head that wasn't the Nundu. It was his own voice. The part of him that had looked at a troll in first year and charged. The part that had driven a basilisk fawn into a diary. The part that had stood in a graveyard and dueled Voldemort because the alternative was dying on his knees. The part of him that was, frankly, a problem. Harry pushed the thought down and went to bed and dreamed of dark water and stone walls and the sound of Dementors breathing. Christmas break came and went in a blur of tension and false cheer. Harry stayed at Hogwarts. So did Neville, whose grandmother had written a terse letter about the current climate making travel inadvisable, which was Augusta Longbottom's way of saying she was terrified but would die before admitting it. So did Daphne, who told her younger sister Astoria to go home with their parents while she stayed behind for advanced coursework, which was Daphne's way of saying she wasn't going to leave Harry without a control anchor during the most stressful period of the school year. The three of them trained every night through the holidays. The room of requirement became their second home, or, in Daphne's case, her first home, since she seemed to find the room's adaptive magic more comfortable than Slytherin's dungeons. Harry's control improved. The full transformation now lasted 10 minutes on a good night, and Harry could modulate the breath with increasing precision. He'd created a targeting system, narrow, focused exhalations that could hit a specific point across the room without affecting anything around it, like a magical sniper rifle. He'd also learned to suppress the passive aura almost completely, holding the Nundu's presence coiled tight inside his chest where it couldn't leak out and terrify every animal in a 100-meter radius. Daphne pushed him relentlessly. "The breath has at least 4 levels of intensity," she said one evening, pacing in front of a row of enchanted training dummies she'd set up. Each dummy was wrapped in a different dark enchantment, minor hexes, jinxes, even a couple of weak curses she'd pulled from her family's grimoire. Level 1, Miasma. Disorientation, mild illness, low-level enchantment disruption. Level 2, Concentrated Mist. Stronger enchantments dissolved, dark creatures repelled. Level 3, Full Exhalation. Everything within range is scrubbed, dark magic, dark creatures, even some dark artifacts. Level 4. She turned to look at him. Level 4 is the one you haven't tested. Because Level 4 might bring down the castle. Because Level 4 might bring down the castle, yes. The terminus vapor that Batista described. Full magical negation. Not just dark magic, all structured magic. Enchantments, wards, charms, everything. She crossed her arms. You need to know what that level does, Harry. And you need to know it before you're in a situation where you use it by accident. Any suggestions for where I should test the magical equivalent of a nuclear detonation? Because I'm fresh out of deserted islands. Daphne gave him a look that could have frozen lava. The Forbidden Forest. Deep enough that the centaurs won't notice. I've identified a clearing about 2 miles in that has no significant magical structures or creatures nearby. You've been scouting the Forbidden Forest. Someone has to plan ahead while you're busy being noble and tortured about things. But the corner of her mouth twitched, and Harry felt the Nundu purr, and something warm settled in his chest that had nothing to do with the beast and everything to do with the girl standing in front of him, brilliant and fearless and so stubbornly alive that it made him ache. "Fine," he said. "The forest. But you stay back when I test it." "I'll stay back at a distance I deem appropriate. Daphne, Harry, my blood malediction acts as a sensor for exactly this type of magic. If I'm not close enough to monitor, we're flying blind. I'll ward myself. I know how to protect myself." Her chin lifted. "I've been doing it my whole life." And there it was again, that flash of something underneath the competence and the control. The girl who'd grown up with death literally in her veins, who'd learned wards before she learned Quidditch, who'd built walls of ice and silence around herself because the alternative was letting people close enough to see the dark veins and the ticking clock and the fear she kept locked away so deep that most people didn't know it existed. Harry saw it. He always saw it now. "Okay," he said quietly. "Together, then." Daphne nodded. And if her eyes were a little brighter than usual, neither of them mentioned it. The Forbidden Forest test happened on a frozen January night, 3 days after term resumed. Harry, Daphne, and Neville, who had appointed himself their lookout and rear guard with the quiet determination that was becoming his signature, crept out of the castle under Harry's invisibility cloak at midnight. Well, crept was generous. Fitting 3 15-year-olds under one cloak was an exercise in creative geometry that resulted in Neville accidentally elbowing Harry in the ribs twice and Daphne delivering a whispered critique of their stealth technique that was so scathing Harry almost laughed. The forest swallowed them like a mouth. 2 miles in, Daphne navigating by wandlight and a map she'd drawn from her scouting trips, because of course she'd made a map, they found the clearing. It was a rough circle about 30 meters across, surrounded by ancient oaks, the ground frozen and bare. The kind of place that felt like it had been waiting for something. Harry stood in the center. Daphne positioned herself at the edge, 60 meters back behind a boulder she'd pre-warded with 3 layers of shielding. Neville took a position between them, wand out, Lion Patronus ready. "Start at level 1, Daphne called, her voice carrying clearly in the frozen air. "I'll monitor the curse's response and call out intensity changes." Harry nodded. Closed his eyes. Found the door. The Nundu responded instantly, rising to meet him with an eagerness that was almost playful. Like a hunting dog hearing the word, walk. Harry opened the door a crack, felt the breath rise in his chest, and exhaled. Level 1, green-tinged mist, barely visible, drifting outward in a lazy spiral. The frost on the ground nearest to Harry turned black and crumbled. The air smelled like ozone. Level 1 confirmed. Daphne called. Curse response minimal, tingling in the wrist. Ambient magic disruption detectable but minor. Increase. Level 2, the mist thickened, took on weight and color, a proper fog now, rolling across the clearing like a living thing. The nearest tree's leaves, the few that remained in winter, shriveled and fell. A faint humming filled the air, like a tuning fork struck and held. Level 2. Curse response moderate, veins darkening to the elbow. The warding spells on the boulder are flickering. This is roughly equivalent to what you did in Hogsmeade. Increase. Level 3. Harry opened the door wider, and the Nundu surged forward with a rumble that vibrated his entire skeleton. The breath that came out of him was no longer mist. It was a wall. A rolling, green-black wave of concentrated negation that hit the clearing like a shockwave. The frozen ground cracked. 3 of the nearest oaks, ancient trees, probably older than Hogwarts, groaned, their trunks splintering as centuries of ambient magical saturation were ripped away in an instant. A boulder at the clearing's edge, a massive granite thing covered in moss, dissolved into gravel. Level 3. Daphne's voice, sharp with exertion. Curse response intense, full arm, veins visible to the shoulder. My shielding is holding but under stress. Harry, I can feel the dark magic in the soil being stripped out. There was a cursed burial site somewhere near here, I can feel it being unmade. This is, a pause. This is extraordinary. This is forest fire level magical purification. Increase when ready. Harry stood in the center of a circle of devastation, chest heaving, the Nundu roaring silently inside him, and thought about level 4. Terminus vapor. Full negation. Everything within range, scrubbed to nothing. He thought about Azkaban. About a fortress full of Dementors. About what it would take to clean a wound that had festered for centuries. He thought about Daphne, standing 60 meters away behind a warded boulder, trusting him. He thought about Cedric, who had trusted him too. Do it, the Nundu whispered. Not in words. In certainty. Harry opened the door all the way. Level 4 wasn't a breath. It was a statement. A fundamental assertion of the Nundu's nature, broadcast through Harry's body and into the world, and the assertion was simple: nothing dark survives in my presence. The terminus vapor exploded outward from Harry like a sphere of green-black lightning, and the world went silent. Not quiet. Silent. As if sound itself had been negated along with everything else. The wave hit the trees and they didn't splinter, they calcified. Dark magic and ambient enchantment and even the wild magic of natural growth stripped away so fast that the wood turned white and brittle as chalk. The ground cracked in radiating lines, frost and soil and stone all losing their magical cohesion simultaneously. The air itself seemed to shimmer, reality wobbling like a heat mirage, as the terminus vapor burned through every structured magical field within its range. Harry felt the wave reach Daphne's wards and hit them and push, and he heard, through the silence, through the negation, a sound that cut through everything else. Daphne gasped. Not in pain. In revelation. Her blood curse, the malediction that had been killing her slowly since birth, screamed as the terminus vapor washed over it, and for one blinding, terrible, glorious instant, Harry felt the curse through their connection. Felt it writhing, shrieking, trying to burrow deeper into her blood to escape the Nundu's negation. And failing. Being dragged to the surface. Being exposed. Then Harry snapped the door shut with every ounce of willpower he possessed, and the wave died, and sound returned, and the forest was quiet again. He was on his knees. When had he fallen? His hands were pressed into the frozen dirt, his arms shaking, his vision swimming. The Nundu settled inside him with a satisfied rumble, like a cat that had just caught the biggest mouse in history and wanted everyone to know about it. Harry. Neville's voice, running footsteps, a hand on his shoulder. Harry, are you, Daphne? Harry croaked. Check Daphne. I'm here. Her voice, closer than expected. He looked up and she was standing 3 meters away, outside the remnants of her boulder, which was now a pile of white powder, wards and all, completely demagicked. Her hair was wild. Her eyes were enormous. And her left arm, Harry stared. Her left arm was clean. The dark veins that had marked her skin for as long as he'd known her, longer, since birth, since the curse had first taken root, were gone. Not faded. Not retreated. Gone. Her skin was pale and smooth and completely, impossibly unmarked. Daphne, Harry whispered. Your arm. She looked down. Stared. Raised her arm, turned it over, examined both sides with the clinical detachment of someone who couldn't afford to hope. Then her other hand came up and touched the clean skin, and her fingers were shaking. It's surface level, she said, her voice steady by sheer force of will. The deep curse is still there, I can feel it in the marrow. But the visible progression, you burned it back 20 years. Maybe more. She looked at him. Harry. You pushed my curse into remission. The word hung in the air like a bell. Remission. Not a cure, they both understood that. The blood malediction was woven into Daphne's DNA, into the fundamental structure of her magic, and even the Nundu's terminus vapor couldn't rewrite genetics. But it could suppress the curse's expression. Beat it back. Give Daphne years, maybe decades, of life that the curse had already stolen. If Harry was there to breathe for her. If the Nundu's proximity kept the curse contained. The implications of that settled over both of them like a blanket made of things neither of them was ready to say out loud. We should go back, Neville said gently. He'd been watching them with an expression that suggested he understood more than either of them realized. Neville was like that, quiet, observant, and far more emotionally intelligent than anyone who'd known him in first year would have believed. It's past 2. If Filch catches us, right, Harry said. He stood up, swayed, steadied himself. His legs felt like they were made of warm butter. Right. Let's go. They walked back through the forest, Harry leaning on Neville's shoulder more than he'd ever admit, and Daphne walked beside them with her left sleeve pushed up, touching her clean skin every few steps like she was checking that it was still real. Nobody spoke. Some things were too big for words. January became February, and the world got worse. The signs were everywhere if you knew how to read them. Disappearances, reported in the back pages of the Prophet if they were reported at all. Prominent wizarding families going silent, their homes found empty, dark marks burned into the walls. Attacks on Muggleborns. Whispered alliances forming in the shadows. The Order of the Phoenix, Harry knew about the Order now, had been quietly briefed by Sirius over the mirror, was stretched thin, its members working double shifts at the Ministry or standing guard over potential targets while Dumbledore moved chess pieces that only he could see. And Voldemort was patient. That was the thing that scared Harry more than anything. The Voldemort of the graveyard had been theatrical, grandiose, the kind of villain who monologued. But the Voldemort of this winter was quiet. Strategic. Building something in the darkness, accumulating power and allies and weapons, and Harry could feel it through the Nundu's expanded senses, a growing pressure on the edges of the magical world, like storm clouds building on the horizon. Something was coming. Something big. It came on a Tuesday in late February, and it came from the last direction anyone expected. Harry was in the DA's evening session, running the group through a modified shield charm exercise, when the door to the room of requirement opened without anyone having approached it from outside. That shouldn't have been possible, the room's protections were layered with Daphne's additional wards, but the door opened anyway, smoothly and silently, and Albus Dumbledore walked in. 32 students froze mid-spell. Dumbledore stood in the doorway, resplendent in robes of midnight blue, half-moon spectacles glinting. His expression was grave. Not angry. Harry had been braced for anger, for the confrontation he'd been expecting all year, but grave in a way that turned Harry's stomach to ice. Professor, Harry said. Harry. Dumbledore's gaze swept the room, taking in the training dummies, the spell marks on the walls, the 32 teenagers with wands drawn and guilty expressions. Something complicated crossed his face. I see you've been busy. We will discuss this later. For now, I need you and Mr. Longbottom in my office. Immediately. That immediately did it. Dumbledore never said immediately. Harry exchanged a look with Hermione, keep the DA calm, I'll explain later, and followed the headmaster out, Neville falling into step beside him. They walked through the castle in silence. Students in the corridors took one look at Dumbledore's expression and got out of the way. The gargoyle leapt aside without a password. The spiral staircase carried them up to the circular office, where the portraits of former headmasters were all awake and whispering urgently among themselves. And there, standing in front of Dumbledore's desk with mud on his robes and blood on his face and an expression that looked like it had been carved from terror, was Kingsley Shacklebolt. Azkaban has fallen, Kingsley said. The world tilted. Fallen? Neville said. His voice was very quiet. Voldemort attacked 3 hours ago. Full assault, Death Eaters, giants, Dementors turned to his side. The garrison was overwhelmed in minutes. The guards. Kingsley's jaw worked. Most are dead. Some were captured. The prisoners, all freed? Dumbledore asked. The Death Eaters in maximum security, yes. Bellatrix Lestrange, Dolohov, Rookwood, the Lestrange brothers, all of them, gone. But that's not the worst of it. Kingsley looked at Neville, and something like agony crossed his face. Headmaster. The long-term patience. St. Mungo's overflow wing. The Longbottoms. Neville made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound, like something breaking inside him, quiet and final. They weren't freed? Harry asked, because Neville couldn't. They were moved, Kingsley said. Deeper into the fortress. Voldemort isn't just using Azkaban as a base, he's using the prisoners as leverage. Human shields. The Longbottoms, and about 40 other prisoners who weren't useful enough to free, are being kept in the lower levels under Dementor guard. Voldemort's message was clear: anyone who attacks Azkaban kills the hostages. Harry looked at Neville. His friend was standing very still, one at his side, and his face was doing something that Harry recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror on a June night in a graveyard. The expression of someone who'd just been given a reason to do something terrible and was deciding, calmly and deliberately, whether or not to accept it. How many Dementors? Harry heard himself ask. Everyone looked at him. Our intelligence suggests the full Azkaban complement, approximately 300, plus an additional force that Voldemort has been breeding or summoning. Potentially 500 total. Dumbledore was watching Harry with those piercing blue eyes, and Harry knew, with absolute certainty, that the headmaster knew about the Nundu. Had probably known for months. Had been watching and waiting, the way Dumbledore always watched and waited, for the moment when Harry would have to make a choice. The fortress is now the most heavily Dementor-guarded location in wizarding history. 500 Dementors. Harry felt the Nundu stir in his chest. Not with fear. With hunger. The beast had sensed Azkaban from a distance and called it a nest of parasites. Now that nest had been taken over by something even worse, and the Nundu's response was immediate and absolute. Clean it. We need to get them out, Neville said. His voice was flat. Controlled. Dangerous in its control, the way a dam is dangerous in its stillness. My parents are in there. Neville, Dumbledore said gently, I understand with respect, Professor, you don't. Neville looked up, and his eyes were dry and clear and blazing. My parents have been prisoners their whole lives. First in their own minds, then in St. Mungo's, and now in a Death Eater dungeon. I am going to get them out. The only question is whether I do it with help or alone. Harry looked at his friend and felt something shift inside him. Not the Nundu, this was purely human. A recognition. A commitment. The kind of bone-deep certainty that you couldn't reason your way into, it just appeared, fully formed, like it had always been there waiting for the right moment. Not alone, Harry said. Neville looked at him. I'm coming with you. Harry, Dumbledore began. Professor. Harry turned to face the headmaster directly, and something in his expression made Dumbledore stop mid-sentence. Maybe it was the green eyes that flickered amber for just a moment. Maybe it was the way the air around Harry seemed to thicken, to gain weight, the Nundu's presence rising to the surface like a leviathan breaking water. You know what I am. You've known for a while, I think. Maybe since Hogsmeade. Maybe longer. Dumbledore regarded him for a long moment. Then, softly, since the Dementor examination. When the creature in the containment unit began to scream, I felt something. Something I have not felt in a very long life. He paused. You carry a Nundu, Harry. The bestial awakening. An inherited gift from a bloodline I thought had burned itself out centuries ago. Then you know what I can do to Dementors. I know what you might be able to do. The distinction matters. A Nundu's breath is theoretically capable of negating dark creatures, yes. But 500 Dementors in an enclosed space, with hostages to consider, with Death Eaters providing support, this is not a theoretical exercise, Harry. This is a fortress that has not been successfully assaulted in 300 years. It's never been assaulted by a Nundu. Silence. The portraits whispered. Fawkes, on his perch, trilled a single, clear note that hung in the air like a promise. Dumbledore looked old then. Old in a way that had nothing to do with his physical age and everything to do with the weight of all the children he'd sent into danger over the decades, all the bright young lives he'd watched walk toward darkness because the world demanded it. I cannot sanction this, he said quietly. I know. If you go without the Order's support. Without official backing. If you are captured or killed, the cause loses its, I know, Professor. They looked at each other. Old man and young one, separated by a century of life and united by the terrible understanding that some things had to be done and the people who did them rarely got to choose comfortable timing. I won't stop you, Dumbledore said finally. Because I don't think I can. And because. He removed his spectacles and cleaned them, a gesture Harry had seen 100 times but which now seemed infinitely weary. Because you may be right. You may be the only person alive who can walk into Azkaban and walk out again. And those prisoners deserve someone who will try. I'm not trying, Harry said. I'm doing it. And he walked out of the office with Neville beside him and the Nundu burning in his chest like a second sun. The planning took 4 days. Harry would have preferred 4 hours, but Daphne, who had joined the War Council approximately 30 seconds after Neville told her what had happened, slamming into the room of requirement with her wand out and her eyes blazing and saying, "Talk, now," insisted on preparation. Thorough, meticulous, leave nothing to chance preparation. You are not charging into a fortress full of Dementors on righteous fury and good intentions, she told Harry flatly, spreading a hand-drawn map of Azkaban across the room of requirement's floor. She'd gotten the layout from her family's archives. The Greengrasses, it turned out, had extensive records on wizarding prisons because several ancestors had been incarcerated in them. This is not a Gryffindor moment. This is a surgical operation. How did you get a floor plan of Azkaban? My great-great-uncle Aldrich was imprisoned there for 17 years for quote-unquote experimental potion-making that exceeded ministry safety parameters. He spent his sentence memorizing the layout and smuggled the map out in his prosthetic leg. She tapped the parchment with her wand, and the lines glowed faintly. The fortress has 5 levels. Ground level is the entry hall and guard quarters. Levels 2 and 3 are standard prisoner cells. Level 4 is maximum security, that's where the Death Eaters were held before Voldemort freed them. Level 5 is the deep cells. Below sea level. That's where they'll be keeping the Longbottoms and the other hostages. Below sea level, Neville repeated. He was studying the map with an intensity that made the air around him feel heavier. Over the past few days, Neville had undergone a transformation that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with purpose. The uncertain boy Harry had met on the Hogwarts Express 5 years ago was gone, replaced by someone harder and quieter and absolutely, immovably determined. It was like watching steel being forged. How do we get down there? Central staircase. One way in, one way out. It's a choke point, easy to defend, hard to assault. The Dementors will concentrate there once they realize they're under attack. Let them, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. That's actually what we want. The more concentrated the Dementors are, the more efficient the breath is. If they're spread throughout the fortress, I'd have to chase them level by level. If they converge on the staircase. He let the implication hang. Daphne's eyes narrowed, not with concern but with calculation. He could practically see the tactical wheels turning behind her expression. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to use myself as a weapon. There's a difference. The difference is about 3 inches and they're both sharp. But she was nodding, already revising the plan in her head. All right. So the approach is, we infiltrate, reach the lower levels, free the hostages, and then you position yourself at the central staircase and breathe. The Dementors converge on you, and you hit them with everything. Level 4. Level 4. Silence settled over the room. They all knew what Level 4 meant. Harry had told them about the Forbidden Forest test, about the Terminus vapor, about the way reality itself had wobbled under the Nundu's full exhalation. Level 4 wasn't a weapon. It was an extinction event, localized and absolute. The hostages will need to be shielded, Daphne said. Level 4 doesn't discriminate, it negates all structured magic, not just dark magic. If the prisoners are caught in the blast radius, their own healing spells, medical enchantments, anything keeping them alive. She glanced at Neville. Your parents. Their condition is maintained by St. Mungo's spells. If those are stripped away, then we get them out before Harry breathes, Neville said. Simple. Final. No room for argument. That means someone has to go down to level 5, locate the hostages, and evacuate them through an alternate route while Harry draws the Dementors to the staircase. Daphne frowned at the map. There's a secondary access tunnel here, an old sea gate used for prisoner transport. It exits onto the rocks at the base of the island. If we have a boat waiting, I can arrange that. Sirius's voice, from the mirror propped up against a chair. He'd been listening to the entire planning session, and his face was a battlefield of emotions, fear, pride, grief, determination, and the specific agony of a man watching his godson plan a suicide mission and being unable to physically intervene because he was a wanted fugitive. Remus and I can be at the island in a modified fishing boat. Muggle vessel, under enchantment. If you can get the hostages to the sea gate, we'll get them to safety. You'd be breaking about 40 ministry laws, Harry pointed out. Sirius grinned, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked like the young man in the old photographs. Reckless. Brilliant. Alive. Harry, I broke 40 ministry laws before breakfast on most days during the First War. This is a Tuesday for me. Harry felt something loosen in his chest. Not the Nundu. Something human. Something that had been wound tight since Dumbledore's office. He wasn't alone. He'd never been alone, no matter how hard the Nundu's solitary instincts pushed him toward isolation. These people, Sirius, Neville, Daphne, they weren't following him. They were walking with him. There was a difference, and it mattered more than he could articulate. There's one more thing, Neville said. Everyone looked at him. He was holding his wand, turning it between his fingers in that habitual gesture, and his expression was calm in a way that seemed too old for 15. We need a fourth person. For the evacuation. I can handle the fighting, and I'll protect the hostages with everything I have, but I can't fight Death Eaters and move injured prisoners at the same time. We need someone else on the ground team. Ron and Hermione would come in a heartbeat, Harry said. But Hermione's strongest in structured magical combat, not infiltration, and Ron's brilliant at strategy, but he's never handled anything like this on the ground, Daphne finished. We need someone who can stay calm in chaos. Someone with good instincts and an unconventional skill set. I know someone, Neville said quietly. Harry looked at him. Who? Luna Lovegood. There was a beat of silence. Luna, Harry repeated. She's the calmest person I've ever met under pressure. In the DA sessions, when everyone else flinches at the training dummies, she just observes. Works the problem. She's creative, she's unpredictable, and she can cast a corporeal Patronus. Neville's jaw tightened. And she's my friend. She won't say no. Harry thought about Luna. Dreamy, distant, seemingly disconnected Luna, who talked about Nargles and Crumplehorn Snorkax and saw things that nobody else could see. Luna, who had watched her mother die and walked through school with Loony trailing behind her like a shadow and never, ever broke. Okay, Harry said. Ask her. Luna said yes. She said it in exactly the way Harry should have expected. Neville brought her to the room of requirement the following evening, and Harry gave her the full briefing: Azkaban, the Dementors, the Death Eaters, the hostages, the plan, the danger. All of it. He didn't sugarcoat anything, because Luna deserved honesty and also because he suspected she'd see through any attempt at spin with those unsettling silver eyes. When he finished, Luna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, Daddy always said that the ministry kept Raxperts in Azkaban's foundations. I always thought he was being metaphorical, but perhaps the Dementors are a kind of Raxpert. They feed on happy thoughts, which is a form of parasitic cognitive interference." She tilted her head. "I'd very much like to see what happens when you breathe on them, Harry. You're not. I mean, you understand the danger." "Oh yes. We might die." She said it the way someone might say, "It might rain." "But Neville's parents are in there, and they've suffered enough, don't you think? Sometimes the right thing to do is also the dangerous thing. I think you already know that." Neville was looking at Luna with an expression that Harry recognized, because he'd seen it on his own face in the mirror after late nights with Daphne. Gratitude and admiration and something deeper that didn't have a name yet but was growing. "Right," Harry said. "You're in their team, Harry on Dementor duty, Daphne as tactical coordinator and Harry's control anchor, Neville and Luna on hostage extraction. Sirius and Remus on Seagate evacuation. 4 teenagers and 2 wanted men against a fortress full of darkness." Harry had faced worse odds. Actually, no, he hadn't. But the thought sounded good in his head, and sometimes that was enough. The night before the mission, Harry couldn't sleep. This was not unusual, he hadn't slept well since June, but tonight's insomnia had a different quality. Not anxiety. Not fear. Something more like focus. The Nundu was fully awake inside him, alert and coiled, a predator sensing that the hunt was close. Its awareness pressed against Harry's, not fighting for control but offering it, sharing senses and instincts and the deep, primal certainty that this was what they were made for. Harry lay in his 4-poster bed in Gryffindor Tower, curtains drawn, listening to Ron's snoring and Seamus's mumbling and Dean's quiet breathing, and felt the beast's readiness like a second heartbeat. "Tomorrow," he told it. "Tomorrow we hunt." The Nundu's purr vibrated his ribcage. At 2 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went to the room of requirement. He wasn't surprised to find Daphne already there. She was sitting on a conjured couch, her knees pulled up, reading a book that looked about 500 years old. Her hair was down, he'd never seen it down before, always the practical knot, the controlled presentation, and it fell past her shoulders in a pale gold curtain. She was wearing a Slytherin jumper 3 sizes too large and wool socks, and she looked, for the first time since Harry had known her, like an actual 15-year-old girl instead of a walking tactical manual. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I don't sleep well on the eve of potentially fatal operations." She closed the book. "Shocking, I know." He sat on the other end of the couch. "Not too close." "Close enough." They were quiet for a while. The room of requirement hummed softly around them, its magic warm and attentive, like a house that wanted its inhabitants to be comfortable. "Are you afraid?" Daphne asked. Harry thought about it. Actually thought about it, instead of giving the automatic Gryffindor answer that fear was irrelevant and bravery was everything in charge. "Not of the Dementors," he said. "Not anymore. The Nundu, I know what I can do to them. I've felt them be afraid of me. It's..." He searched for the word. "Strange. They used to be my worst fear. 3rd year, the Dementor on the train, hearing my mother scream, that was the most afraid I've ever been. And now they're afraid of me. It should feel like justice. It mostly just feels weird." "What are you afraid of, then?" "Losing control. Not the transformation, I've got that. But the breath. Level 4. If I misjudge the range, if the hostages aren't far enough away, if Neville and Luna can't get everyone out in time." He stared at the fire that the room had kindly provided. "The Nundu's breath doesn't care about collateral damage. It just negates. And I'm going to use it in a building full of innocent people. That's why I'll be there. Her voice was quiet but firm. The voice she used when she was stating facts, not opinions. To monitor. To tell you when it's safe to breathe and when it's not. That's my function in this operation, Harry. I'm your targeting system. You're more than that and you know it. The words came out before he could filter them, honest and raw and hanging in the air between them like a live wire. Daphne looked at him, and for a moment, her perfect control slipped, and Harry saw what was underneath. Not the Ice Queen. Not the tactical genius. Just Daphne. 15 years old, carrying a death sentence in her blood, sitting on a couch in a magical room on the eve of something that might kill them both, and looking at a boy who breathed death and somehow made her feel alive. I know, she said softly. Harry's hand moved without permission. Crossed the space between them on the couch and found hers. Her fingers were cold, they were always cold, the curse stealing warmth like a slow tax, and Harry wrapped his hand around them and felt the Nundu's warmth flow through the contact, chasing the cold away. Daphne's breath caught. Her fingers tightened on his. When this is over, Harry said, looking at their intertwined hands, I want to talk about the curse. Really talk about it. Not as a tactical consideration. Not as a magical interaction. As something that's happening to someone I care about. Someone you care about. Don't make me spell it out, Greengrass, I'm rubbish at this. The tiniest smile. You really are. Daphne. Harry. They looked at each other. The fire crackled. The room hummed. And somewhere deep in Harry's chest, the Nundu, solitary by nature, territorial, a creature that walked alone through the darkest places in the world, settled into a contented stillness it had never shown before. As if it had found something it hadn't known it was looking for. Harry didn't kiss her. It wasn't the right moment, tomorrow was too big, too dangerous, too much, and Daphne wasn't the kind of person you kissed on impulse. She was the kind of person you chose deliberately, with your eyes open and your fears acknowledged and your hands steady, because she deserved deliberation and she'd see through anything less. But he held her hand. And she held his. And they sat together in the room of requirement until the fire burned low, not speaking, not needing to, two people with death in their blood and defiance in their bones, preparing for the dawn. They left Hogwarts at sunset the following day. The exit strategy was Daphne's design, a disillusionment chain, for people linked by a modified charm that extended Harry's invisibility cloak's properties through physical contact. Harry held the cloak, Daphne held Harry's arm, Neville held Daphne's hand, Luna held Neville's elbow. They looked, if anyone had been watching, like absolutely nothing, for patches of empty air drifting across the grounds toward the forbidden forest. From the forest, they sighed along, because Harry was the only one with the power to cover the distance. The Nundu's magical reserves dwarfed a normal wizard's, and long-range apparition drank magic like water. Harry had practiced the coordinates obsessively, a rocky outcropping on the Scottish coast, 30 miles south of Azkaban, where Sirius and Remus were waiting with the boat. The landing was rough. Neville stumbled. Luna looked mildly disoriented but recovered faster than anyone. Daphne didn't stumble, she never stumbled, but her grip on Harry's arm tightened and didn't release. The North Sea spread before them, grey and violent and enormous. The wind hit like a fist. Salt spray stung Harry's eyes, and underneath the physical cold, he could feel it, the supernatural cold. The Dementor cold. Distant but growing. A stain on the northern horizon, visible not to his eyes but to the Nundu's senses, a dark, pulsing wrongness, like an infected wound on the body of the ocean. Azkaban. It's worse than I imagined, Daphne murmured. She had her left arm pressed against her body, and Harry knew, without seeing, that the veins were darkening. Even at this distance, the concentration of Dementors was triggering her curse. The dark magic density. Harry, it's off any scale I know. This isn't just Dementors. The fortress itself is saturated. Centuries of suffering, soaked into the stone. Good, Harry said, and meant it. That means there's more for the breath to burn. You say the most disturbing things sometimes. I know. Ready? No. Let's go. Sirius emerged from behind a rock formation, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 4 days. Beside him, Remus Lupin, thin, scarred, wearing a patched coat that had probably been old when Dumbledore was young, raised a hand in greeting. "Boat's ready," Sirius said. His eyes were locked on Harry. Searching. Cataloging. Memorizing, just in case. Modified fishing trawler, Muggle-built, under Notice Me Not and anti-detection charms. It'll get you to within a quarter mile of the island. After that, you'll need to go by water. The Dementor aura is too thick for any vessel to approach closer without the enchantments failing. We're swimming the last quarter mile. Ron would have been horrified. Harry just nodded. Bubblehead charms, Daphne said. I prepared them. They'll hold for 30 minutes in the current temperature. Cold water won't be a problem for Harry, Sirius said, with the ghost of a smile. The Nundu's core temperature will keep him warm. The rest of you, though, warming charms, and make them strong. The North Sea in February is not your friend. They boarded the boat. It was exactly what Sirius had described, a weather-beaten fishing trawler that looked like it belonged in a harbor pub's decorative scheme, but it moved through the water with unnatural smoothness, cutting through waves that should have tossed it like a cork. Remus steered from the wheelhouse, his werewolf senses reading the current and the wind with preternatural accuracy. Harry stood at the bow and watched Azkaban grow on the horizon. It was worse than he'd imagined. The fortress rose from the sea like a clenched fist of black stone, a tower of angles and darkness that seemed to drink the fading light. No windows. No flags. No sign of life. Just stone and shadow and the circling, endless shapes of Dementors, hundreds of them, wheeling around the tower like vultures around carrion, their dark robes trailing in the wind like torn banners. The cold intensified as they approached. Harry felt it pressing against his skin, seeking entry, and he let the Nundu rise, just enough to create a warm buffer around his body, a personal radius of anti-Dementor energy that pushed the cold back. Neville shivered. Luna's eyes widened. Daphne pressed closer to Harry's side, drawing on the warmth, and the curse in her blood quieted. At the quarter-mile mark, Remus cut the engine. This is as close as we can take her, Sirius said, joining them at the rail. He looked at Azkaban, and something old and terrible moved across his face. He'd spent 12 years in that fortress. 12 years of Dementors and cold and despair. 12 years of innocence that nobody believed. Harry. I know. You don't. Sirius's hand closed on Harry's shoulder, gripped tight enough to leave bruises. In there, the Dementors are worse than anything you've felt. The castle amplifies them. The stone resonates with their energy, creates feedback loops. It's not just cold and sadness. It's like drowning in every bad thing that's ever happened to you, all at once, forever. That's what they do. That's what they are. Sirius. Harry met his godfather's eyes. Amber flickered at the edges of his green. I'm not the boy on the train anymore. I'm not even the boy in the graveyard. I'm something new. And the Dementors should be afraid of me. Sirius stared at him for a long moment. Then he pulled Harry into a hug, sudden, fierce, desperate, and held on for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Come back, he whispered into Harry's hair. I will. Sirius released him. Stepped back. Nodded. Harry looked at his team. Daphne, calm and focused, her wand already casting bubblehead charms with precise, economical movements. Neville, solid as bedrock, his lion Patronus shimmering faintly at the tip of his wand, ready. Luna, serene and strange and completely unafraid, smiling at the fortress of darkness like it was a particularly interesting cloud formation. Let's go clean house, Harry said. They went over the side. The North Sea swallowed them in darkness and cold, and they swam toward the worst place in the wizarding world, and Harry felt the Nundu inside him uncoil fully for the first time in its existence, felt the beast expand to fill every corner of his being, felt the breath building in lungs that were no longer entirely human, and thought, "I'm coming. And you will know what fear tastes like." The approach was the worst part. Not the cold, Harry's Nundu aura kept him warm, and the others' warming charms held, barely. Not the physical effort, 15-year-old bodies with adrenaline and magic coursing through them could swim a quarter-mile in rough seas, even if they'd be feeling it for days afterward. Not even the growing Dementor presence, the despair and cold that intensified with every stroke, pressing against Harry's protective aura like hands trying to find a crack. The worst part was the noise. Or rather, the silence. Because as they got closer to Azkaban, the normal sounds of the ocean, waves, wind, the distant cry of seabirds, faded. Replaced by nothing. An absence of sound so complete that it felt physical, like cotton stuffed into Harry's ears. The Dementor's influence, extending beyond emotion into the fabric of reality itself. Near Azkaban, even the world's natural sounds gave up and went quiet. Into that silence, Harry could hear screaming. Not with his ears. With the Nundu's senses. The beast could perceive what the Dementors fed on, the harvested joy and hope and warmth of their prisoners, and what it perceived sounded like screaming. Hundreds of voices, stretched thin and agonized, the distilled suffering of every person trapped in that fortress. It was the most horrible sound Harry had ever experienced, worse than his mother's screams in the Dementor's presence, because this wasn't a memory. This was happening right now. The Nundu's fury crystallized into something cold and absolute. Not hot anger. Not rage. Something beyond emotion entirely. A predator's clarity. A certainty that transcended thought. These things end tonight. They reached the island. Hauled themselves onto the rocks at the base of the fortress, gasping and shivering, bubblehead charms dissolving. Harry pulled Daphne up after him. Her fingers were like ice even through the warming spells, and steadied her while she found her footing. "Status," he murmured. "Curse is at moderate activity. I can feel the Dementors above us, they haven't detected us yet. The anti-detection charms are holding." She pressed her hand flat against the rock and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. "I can feel the prisoners. Below us. Level 5, just like the map said. They're alive, Harry. Barely, but alive. Neville. Luna. You know the route?" Neville nodded. His face was pale, the Dementor cold leaching color from his skin despite the warming charms, but his eyes were steady. Luna stood beside him, her wand out, her expression, for once, not dreamy. Alert. Present. The Luna who existed underneath the whimsy, the girl who'd been forged by loss and sharpened by solitude, was fully in charge now. "Seagate is around the eastern base," Neville said. "We go in, find the access tunnel, descend to level 5. Locate the hostages. Bring them back up through the tunnel and out the Seagate." He paused. "How long do we have before you breathe?" "I'll give you 15 minutes from when we enter the fortress," Harry said. "That's the maximum I can hold the Dementor's attention at the staircase without unleashing level 4. After 15 minutes, I breathe, and anything caught in the blast radius is gone. Be clear by then." 15 minutes. "Got it." Neville held out his hand, and Harry shook it, and something passed between them, not magic, not the Nundu, just the understanding of two boys who'd been shaped by darkness and chosen to fight it. "Good luck, Neville." "You too, Harry." Luna touched Harry's arm as she passed. "The Nargles say you'll be magnificent," she whispered, and then she and Neville disappeared around the rocky base of the island, moving fast and silent, shadows merging with shadows. Harry and Daphne stood alone on the rocks, looking up at the fortress. Close up, Azkaban was even worse. The black stone seemed to sweat darkness, oily tendrils of corrupt magic seeping from between the bricks like the building itself was diseased. The Dementor presence was a physical weight now, pressing down on them from above, and Harry could feel individual Dementors, each one a distinct note of cold and hunger in his Nundu-enhanced perception. 300 above. 200 more inside. The building was infested. Main entrance is there, Daphne said, pointing to a massive iron door set into the base of the fortress. It'll be warded. I know. The wards are dark magic. Harry looked at her. Looked at the door. Felt the Nundu's certainty like a warm hand on his spine. I know, he said again, and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of something that had been patient for long enough. He walked to the door, placed both hands flat against the iron, and breathed. Not from his mouth. Through his hands. A focused, concentrated pulse of the Nundu's energy, level 2, directed into the ward structure like a key into a lock. The dark magic in the ward shrieked, a high, thin, inhuman sound, and then dissolved. Evaporated. Centuries of accumulated protective enchantment, gone in the time it took Harry to exhale. The iron door swung open. Beyond it, darkness. Cold. The sound of distant, hollow breathing that wasn't breathing at all. Harry stepped inside. And the Dementors of Azkaban felt him arrive. The interior of the fortress was everything Sirius had described and worse. Corridors of black stone, narrow and angled wrong, like the architects had designed them to disorient. No windows, light came from guttering torches enchanted with a sickly greenish flame that cast more shadow than illumination. The air was thick, saturated with despair so concentrated it was almost a taste, metallic, bitter, like blood and bile and old tears. And cold. God, the cold. Harry's Nundu aura was a bubble of warmth around him and Daphne, but beyond that bubble, the temperature was inhuman. Frost crawled up the walls in fractal patterns. Their breath condensed, or would have, if Harry's breath hadn't carried a faint green tinge that ate the frost wherever it touched. Ground level, Daphne whispered, her wand out, her left arm pressed against her side. The curse was reacting, Harry could feel it through their connection, the dark veins spreading, the malediction excited by the ambient dark magic like a hunting dog catching a scent. Guard quarters should be ahead. The central staircase is beyond that. They moved through the corridors, and the screaming in Harry's Nundu senses got louder. Clearer. Individual voices now, distinguishable from the mass, a woman weeping, a man repeating a name over and over, a child, and Harry's vision went amber for a dangerous second, whimpering in the dark. Hostages. Level 5. Neville and Luna are coming for you. Hold on. The first Death Eater appeared around a corner and died before he realized what had hit him. Not died. Harry couldn't kill, wouldn't kill, not a human, not unless there was absolutely no alternative. But the Nundu's aura, focused and directed through Harry's outstretched hand, hit the masked figure with a wave of primal terror so intense that the man's nervous system simply shut down. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings, unconscious before he hit the stone, his wand clattering away into the darkness. Daphne stunned him for good measure, then bound him with conjured ropes. Efficient. Clean. That's Raoul, I think. Based on the build. You can identify Death Eaters by body type. Old blood families, Potter. I've been at formal dinners with half these people. She stepped over the unconscious man. Central staircase. This way. They encountered 2 more Death Eaters before reaching the staircase, both neutralized the same way, Harry's fear aura overwhelming their defenses, Daphne's binding spell securing them. It was almost too easy, and that worried Harry, because too easy usually meant trap. The central staircase of Azkaban was a spiral of black iron descending into the heart of the fortress, and looking down it was like looking into the throat of something vast and hungry. The Dementor presence concentrated here, just as Daphne had predicted. Harry could feel them below, clustering on levels 2 and 3, hundreds of dark, cold, hollow presences stacked atop each other like a column of living darkness. And they were aware of him. Harry could feel their attention, hundreds of eyeless gazes turning upward, sensing the Nundu's presence filtering down through the stone. He could feel their confusion. They didn't understand what they were sensing, this thing that smelled like death but wasn't prey, this presence that made their ancient, parasitic instincts recoil. Some of them were afraid already. Others were angry. And some, the oldest ones, the Dementors that had haunted these halls for centuries, were curious. "They know I'm here," Harry said. "I feel them massing. Levels 2 and 3. Daphne's voice was tight. Her curse was fully active now, dark veins visible past her rolled-up sleeve, climbing toward her shoulder. Standing this close to Harry's Nundu aura kept the curse from progressing, but the ambient dark magic of Azkaban was pushing it harder than anything they'd encountered. "Harry, they're going to come for you. All of them. That's the plan." "I know that's the plan, I designed the plan, but there's a difference between a plan on parchment and 500 Dementors converging on your position in an enclosed stairwell, Daphne." He turned to her. Took her hand, the left one, the curse-marked one, though the visible marks had faded since the forest. Held it between both of his, and let the Nundu's warmth flow through the contact. "I need you to go." "What?" "Go to the sea gate. Meet Neville and Luna. Help with the evacuation." "Absolutely not. I'm your control anchor, and I love you for it." The words came out simple and certain and completely unplanned, and they landed in the silence between them like a stone dropping into still water, and Daphne's eyes went wide, not with the clinical analysis he was used to, not with the controlled composure, but with something raw and real and terrified. "You," she started. "I know. Terrible timing. Really spectacularly bad timing, actually, considering I'm about to pick a fight with 500 Dementors. But Daphne, listen to me." He held her hand tighter. "When I breathe at level 4, the terminus vapor doesn't discriminate. It strips all magic. Including the Nundu's own protective aura. Which means if you're standing next to me when I do it, I can't protect you. The curse in your blood," understanding crashed across her face. "It would surge. Without the Nundu's presence suppressing it, and with all that dark magic in the air, the terminus vapor might destabilize the curse instead of suppressing it. I can't risk that. I won't risk that. So you'll face them alone." "I'll face them as the Nundu. Alone is what the Nundu does." She stared at him. The torchlight caught the angles of her face, the set of her jaw, the brightness in her eyes that she would never, in 1,000 years, admit were tears. "You are the most infuriating person I have ever met," she whispered. "I know. When this is over, we are having a very long conversation about your complete inability to express emotions at appropriate times. I'd like that. You'd better come back, Harry Potter." "I will." She kissed him. Not soft. Not gentle. Not the tentative, exploratory first kiss of two teenagers who didn't know what they were doing. This was a statement, a declaration, a brand pressed against his mouth that said mine and yours and don't you dare die. It lasted 3 seconds. It lasted forever. Then Daphne pulled back, squeezed his hand once, hard enough to hurt, hard enough to leave a mark he'd feel for hours, and turned and ran. Down the corridor, toward the eastern tunnel, toward Neville and Luna and the sea gate and the world outside this fortress of the damned. Harry watched her go. Then he turned to face the staircase. Below him, 500 Dementors were rising. He could feel them, a tide of cold and darkness and hunger surging up through the levels, drawn by the Nundu's presence like moths to a flame, except these moths were the size of humans and fed on joy and there were 500 of them. The fear should have been overwhelming. The old Harry, the Harry of 3rd year, the Harry who'd fallen off his broom at the sound of his mother's scream, would have been on his knees. But the old Harry didn't have a Nundu's heart beating in his chest. Didn't have the taste of Daphne's kiss on his lips. Didn't have the knowledge that somewhere below, Neville was carrying his parents toward the light, and Luna was humming something strange and true, and Sirius was waiting on the water, and every single one of them was counting on him. Harry stood at the top of the central staircase of Azkaban, and he was not afraid. He opened the door inside himself. Not a crack. Not halfway. All the way. Wider than he'd ever opened it, wider than the Forbidden Forest, wider than he'd known was possible, and the Nundu came through like a river bursting a dam. The transformation was instantaneous. 1 second, a 15-year-old boy stood at the top of a staircase. The next, a Nundu filled the corridor. Massive. Tawny fur rippling over muscle that no natural animal could possess, each limb thick as a tree trunk, claws sinking into iron and stone like they were soft clay. The mane, not fur, not smoke, but something between, billowed around its head in a corona of darkness that moved against the wind, against gravity, against the rules of the physical world. The eyes blazed green, not human green, not killing curse green, but the green of ancient forests and deep seas and the color that life itself might be if you could see it stripped of everything that wasn't essential. The Nundu filled the corridor, and its tail lashed once, and the stone wall behind it cracked from floor to ceiling. And it looked down the staircase at the rising tide of Dementors, and it opened its mouth. Not to breathe. Not yet. To roar. The sound that came out of the Nundu's throat was not a sound. It was a physical force, a shockwave of predatory dominance that rolled down the staircase like an avalanche and hit the ascending Dementors with the weight of a falling sky. The first rank of Dementors, 20, 30 of them, packed into the narrow stairwell, imploded. Not from the breath. From the sheer pressure of the Nundu's presence, amplified by the stone walls, focused by the staircase's funnel shape, hitting them like a psychic battering ram. Those Dementors didn't flee. They crumbled. Dissolved. Their dark robes shredding, their forms coming apart like smoke in a gale, their stolen warmth and joy and happiness releasing into the air in a cascade of golden motes that drifted upward like sparks from a fire. The remaining Dementors, hundreds of them, crammed into the levels below, screamed. Harry had never heard Dementors scream before. He hadn't known they could. The sound was indescribable, a frequency that existed below hearing and above pain, the sound of creatures that had only ever inspired fear discovering, for the first time in their ancient existence, what fear felt like from the inside. Good, the Nundu thought, with Harry's mind and the beast's heart. Now you understand. The Dementors surged. Not upward, they weren't attacking anymore. They were trying to escape. Fleeing downward, deeper into the fortress, away from the thing at the top of the stairs, packing into the lower levels like sardines in a tin. But there was nowhere to go. Harry counted in his head. Neville. Luna. 15 minutes. You said 15 minutes. He started down the stairs. The Nundu descended into Azkaban like death walking, each massive paw landing on iron steps that buckled and groaned under the weight. The mane of darkness trailed behind, filling the stairwell with shadow, and where the shadow touched the walls, the dark magic that had saturated the stone for centuries burned away. Scrubbed clean. The stone beneath the corruption was pale, almost white, and Harry realized with a distant, wondering part of his mind that Azkaban had originally been built from limestone. Light stone. The blackness wasn't the building's natural color. It was centuries of accumulated darkness, staining the stone like soot. The Nundu was cleaning it away just by being there. Level 2. Cells on either side, iron doors hanging open or blasted off their hinges. Empty, the prisoners had been moved, either freed by Voldemort or taken to level 5. The Dementors here fled before the Nundu like shadows before sunrise, pouring down the staircase ahead of him, and Harry let them go because every Dementor that ran deeper was a Dementor that moved further from the sea gate, further from Neville and Luna and the hostages. Level 3. More cells, more emptiness, the air growing colder and thicker with every step downward. The screaming in Harry's senses was deafening now, not the Dementors, but the prisoners below, the hostages on level 5, their suffering a constant, agonizing backdrop. But threading through the screaming, faintly, like a melody half heard through a storm, Luna's voice. Humming. Harry focused on it, following the sound through the Nundu's enhanced senses, and felt, with a relief so intense it nearly broke his concentration, Neville and Luna moving through level 5. They'd found the hostages. They were moving them toward the sea gate. Hurry, Harry thought. I can't hold them much longer. Because the Dementors had stopped running. They'd reached the bottom of the staircase, level 4, maximum security, the deepest point the stairs reached, and they had nowhere else to go. 500 Dementors, minus the 30-odd Harry had destroyed with his roar, crammed into the corridors of level 4, a solid wall of darkness and cold and hunger, and they had turned to face the descending Nundu with the desperate courage of animals that had been cornered. Harry, the Nundu, stood on the level 3 landing and looked down at the horde. They filled the stairwell. They filled the corridors beyond. They clung to the walls and the ceiling, dark robes merging until it was impossible to tell where one Dementor ended and the next began. A sea of darkness. A wall of everything wrong with the magical world, every parasitic, soul-eating, joy-devouring instinct given form and concentrated into a single, suffocating mass. The cold was beyond anything Harry had ever experienced. Even the Nundu's aura strained against it, the sheer weight of 500 Dementors pressing against his warmth like a glacier grinding against a mountain. His worst memories clawed at the edges of his mind: Cedric, the graveyard, the screams, the green light, always the green light, and for one terrible moment, the boy inside the beast faltered. Then he felt it. The faintest tremor through the stone. Footsteps. Running. Neville and Luna, moving through the level 5 tunnels, the hostages behind them, heading for the sea gate. He felt Luna's humming grow fainter, they were moving away. Getting clear. And then, through the Nundu's senses, he felt something else. Something that steadied him more than any Patronus ever had. Daphne. At the sea gate. Alive. Safe. Her curse flaring in response to the ambient darkness, but contained. Waiting. Mine, the Nundu thought, and it was Harry's thought too, and it was enough. He checked his internal count. 14 minutes and 30 seconds since they'd entered the fortress. Close enough. Harry, the Nundu, drew a breath. Not a quick inhalation. Not the short, focused breaths of levels 1 through 3. This was something else entirely. The Nundu's chest expanded, ribcage spreading, lungs filling with air that was already changing, already converting, the magical process happening in real time as oxygen became something else, something green and dark and absolute, something that existed in the space between life and death and said no more. The Dementors felt it happening. The wall of darkness convulsed. Individual Dementors tried to flee, slamming against each other, against the walls, skeletal hands scrabbling at stone, dark robes tangling. But there was nowhere to go. They were packed too tight, too deep, a mass of creatures that had never needed to flee anything because nothing had ever been capable of threatening them. Until now. The Nundu held the breath for 3 heartbeats. Building. Concentrating. Compressing the terminus vapor into something denser, more focused, more absolute than anything Harry had produced before. 3 heartbeats felt like 3 eternities. Then the Nundu opened its mouth and breathed. Chapter 3, The Breath of Azkaban. Chapter 3, The Breath of Azkaban, The Infiltration. See Approach under Disillusionment. Harry in partial transformation to suppress the Dementor aura as they get close. Inside Azkaban, horror. Prisoners wasting away, Dementors everywhere, Death Eater patrols. Neville finds his parents. Emotional devastation and resolve. Daphne's blood curse flares from the concentrated dark magic. Harry has to partially transform just to keep her alive, his Nundu aura acting as a shield. They free prisoners, but the alarm goes. Hundreds of Dementors converge. Death Eaters too. Bellatrix Lestrange leading them. Harry tells everyone to get behind him. Steps forward. And transforms fully. The full Nundu, massive, leopard-like, with a mane of dark smoke and eyes like killing curses. He breathes. The breath rolls through Azkaban like a green-black fog. Every Dementor it touches doesn't just retreat, they dissolve. Shredded like shadows hit by sunlight but 1,000 times more violent. The ancient stone cracks. The dark magic woven into the prison's walls for centuries begins to unravel. Harry nearly loses himself in the beast. It's Daphne's voice, Neville's hand on his flank, Luna humming something strange and true, that pull him back. Aftermath, Azkaban is emptied of Dementors. Every single one. The wizarding world is stunned. Voldemort is furious, and for the first time, afraid. Harry collapses from the effort. Wakes days later. Daphne is there. Their relationship has shifted past the point of pretending. Final scene, Voldemort in his throne room, hearing the report. He doesn't rage. He goes quiet. Then he says, very softly, that they need to kill the boy before he learns what else the Nundu can do. Story closes with Harry, recovered, standing on the astronomy tower. He can feel the beast under his skin, content, powerful, waiting. He's not afraid of it anymore. He's not afraid of much anymore. And that, he thinks, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Ready to on your prompt. It's going to be a wild ride. Fire now.